There'll be other cases.
There are no other cases. This is the case. There are no other cases. This is the case. There are no other cases. This is the case.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where this week we are continuing our exploration of The Verdict. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Inception.
I wonder, does that do any good, John? Is that going to help you out at all?
Noted.
It's been duly noted.
This is the Outlaw John Rocha. I am a writer, producer, and host in San Diego, California, voiceover artist as well, and massive lover of this film, and probably the reason why we're doing 3 parts in this movie, which I apologize, but I think we've had some wonderful discussions, and I'm very much looking forward to us diving into the latter half of the movie here.
I do not apologize at all, and I'll tell you something. So normally when we, go to record, I'll tend to review my notes because I want to get it very fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, usually I just blast through the notes because I've read them multiple times before.
Yes.
I went line by line and kept referencing back to the video, looking at every single shot to make sure I understood what was happening because, frankly, there is so much here.
Yeah.
Like every detail seems important to me as I'm looking through this. So I am not sorry we're taking this much time because this is what the movie deserves.
Yes, I 100% agree with you. And I wish Sidney was still around to hear our episodes on this film, for God's sakes. And
Yeah.
Paul. Yeah.
Absolutely. And before we get going, we should say that the best way you can support the Cine-Files is through patreon.com/the Cine-Files or through Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe and get ad-free versions of the show, access to our Cine-Files shorts. We have some good ones coming out, including John and I were just discussing off the mic how we're going to honor. There's now been 3 great actors we've lost recently, Chris Christopherson, Maggie Smith, and John Ashton. And we're discussing that those will probably be Cine-Files shorts coming up. And the best way to get them is either through patreon.com/the Cine-Files or Apple Podcasts. Those are the most important ways you can support the Cine-Files.
And another way you can support the show is, during the ad breaks, you hear the sponsors of the show promoting their products and pushing their products. Sometimes it's Steve and I doing the commercials for their products, but trying out those products and using our codes are super important because it lets those clients and those sponsors know that this is a place that their stuff is welcome and that we are doing a great job in promoting their products, and they want to keep supporting the show. So if any of those products stand out for you, please make sure you use our Cine-Files code.
Absolutely. And where we left off, we had just watched as Frank Galvin was just ripped to pieces by the one nurse who he couldn't get to testify. She called him a whore. She was said he's just like all the others, has no sense of loyalty, and only cares about making $1.
Yeah.
And that shot, I mean, we ended it in our last part, but that shot of Newman's face when she slams the door in it is just everything.
We're in the descent to hell now. We're beginning the descent into hell with Frank Galvin here, or we're deep in it rather. So,
well, and now we're going to cut from there to basically the devil, because now we're going to go to the other side where we hear all of their, what we'll call opposition research, I suppose, which is they got the info on Dr. Thompson, which of course isn't unusual because you have to submit who your witnesses are. So of course the other side would know about him. I love the moment as they're describing him.
1976 got a courtesy appointment, staff of anesthesiology, East Hampton Hospital for Women.
And there's so much condescension in this,
Yeah, it's funny watching it this time around, and I've watched it a few times for our show because I just love this movie. There is that undercurrent of racism that I had not really grasped the millions of times I'd watched this film before. I guess because in my mind, that had been such an accepted thing to portray in certain ways back then. So in my mind, I just didn't quite clock it. But being, of course, more aware now as adult, we're more having these conversations and we're more aware of looking back on our content and seeing these things pop out. It was so evident. It's not only just where he worked at or what clinic he was in or how much experience or how age. It's also because he's black. And I had not clocked Frank Galvin even having an issue with it, like we mentioned in the last episode when he comes off the train. So to see them speak about it with it dripping out of their mouths, I thought was a stark reminder of the situation as it was back then.
It's a wonderful cocktail of racism, classism, and elitism all sort of mixed up together
into one, yeah.
in a delicious quaff. I mean, it's just so like, and what's so funny is I don't know that they could pull those things apart, of like which one it is. Because the fact is, these are the elite. All of these people not only probably went to Harvard or Yale, but they also came up as children of people who went to Harvard and Yale. They've gone to all the clubs. They are the elite. Yeah. So I don't even know to some degree that of course, people don't tend to see their own biases and racisms, but certainly the moment after he describes that this guy has worked as a professional witness, which is not, by the way, I know people. My uncle, for instance, is a realtor. He has worked as a professional witness in real estate cases for 50 years.
Wow.
I mean, that's just a normal way to make an extra buck. And there's nothing dishonorable about it, is the reason I bring it up. And then as they go over this, all these cases he's worked, and then there's a little pause, and then they say,
and he's black.
And there's a smug sort of smile because they know what Frank and Mickey know, which is what you said in our last part, which is this is going to be a Boston jury.
Yeah.
And that's who's going to be judging this.
I tell you how you handle the fact that he's black. You don't touch it. You don't mention it. You treat him just like anybody else, neither better nor worse.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe you're not the devil.
And then he says,
and let's have a black lawyer sit at our table.
Bang. Yeah. We were never going to have a black lawyer at all, but now we'll do it because they've got a black doctor.
And so they head off, and then we're with Dr. Thompson. We're back in the office, and he says,
they gave her the wrong anesthetic under the circumstances. Her sister said she ate 1 hour prior to admittance.
Well, that's what her sister said. But the admittance form says she ate 9 hours prior to being admitted.
I think this is the one area where I go, man, the lawyers are a little bit dumb to not be exploring this thing because they've hit it multiple times now.
I like the fact that he comes off as a believable doctor. The way he's speaking about this stuff, like even when Mickey counters, he's like, the shaking of the head, the waving of the hand, it's not condescending. It's more like, I get where you're going. I know where you're going. And I'm telling you that's not true.
Right.
And I'm telling you what happened. So although both sides have seen this guy as a liability, we as the viewer, who are hopefully not racist, are looking at this guy and we're like, this guy is actually legitimately correct in what he's saying and how he's portraying this stuff,
Well, I mean, we said this in the last part. There is something about this actor that has this calm, gentle feeling that you really like and want to trust him,
Well, this is why Joe Seneca worked for so long in the 1980s, so consistently,
And then he asks him about his job, and we hear again about East Hampton Hospital for Women, and Mickey's reaction is,
now, what is that, a joke?
Because I think Mickey's frustrated with like, this is not going to be enough to win this case.
Yeah.
And he goes up again, and he brings up that these are famous doctors on the other side.
Yeah.
Like, I think here's what I'm feeling. And I don't know what you feel. I feel that Mickey is frustrated and pissed that they're in this situation, but can't quite bring himself to not like this doctor.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Exactly. But I also think that he is grilling him like he thinks Kincannon's going to grill him.
Totally.
So he's prepping him to see his responses. So Mickey's going on, and maybe he's going a little bit farther than what Kincannon will do there in the courtroom. But he's doing that to see if this guy can be shaken and what his reaction will be. So it may seem abhorrent for us, but for people who know about this kind of stuff, this is pretty standard. And we saw it in the last episode. We talked about in the last episode, Steve, when the doctor was getting grilled by Kincannon. So these are kind of companion scenes in a way.
Well, and it's funny too, because you bring that up because I think the contrast between the two scenes is amazing. I am certain that Mickey is a very solid lawyer.
Yes.
Like he has been successful. He's not super rich, but he's good.
Yeah.
There is no comparison between the way Mickey prepares Dr. Thompson to the way Kincannon prepares Dr. Fowler. There's just no comparison at all.
Yeah, agreed.
And then the scene ends with him saying,
You know what code blue is?
Code blue.
It's a common medical term.
and I'll tell you, so here's the little rabbit hole I went down. My reaction to this is like, come on. Code blue is like, I mean, how could this doctor not know what code blue is? So, but then I went, okay, it's 1982.
Right.
I don't know when the term code blue became a common term. And so I went to look up where code blue became a common term. And do you know what, the first AI answer on my Google search told me?
What was it?
1990.
Oh.
And so I went, oh, and then I tried to find when these terms were standardized. They were actually standardized in hospitals like in 2000.
Oh, wow.
So in fact, I kind of got to the end. I'm like, you know what? Maybe it is possible that Dr. Thompson, as an older doctor in 1982, wouldn't know this term because it was just getting rolled out at the time,
Right.
you know?
Right.
This next scene, dude, it is shattering. We're back at, I think, the hotel where Laura is staying. Paul Newman walks in the door, stands in the doorway, looking totally lost out there in empty space, the way Lumet stages it, and says,
We're going to lose. Think it's my fault.
how are you feeling here?
I mean, yeah, right. We've been seeing him go through hell here, losing his main doctor, then bringing the other doctor in, and it's not, and he didn't even know he was black, which is the level of research here. And the feeling is that this is all not going to be enough. And he's just been lambasted by his client's sister's husband for going off on his own to do this without their permission. So he has set himself up really to be destroyed by everybody, including Mickey, who gave him this case and told him to plead out the case. He is set up right now at this point in the movie to be destroyed by everything. And he shows up at her house, completed. And this is the guts of the movie. This is what I think is so important for people to understand. This, you don't put leading men in these positions at that time. It doesn't happen at that time. So to have Paul Newman willingly take a role like this, and it's not like he's the hero against all the odds. These fuck-ups are his fault. And so for us, we have to kind of look at this and go like, well, how much sympathy do I have for this guy? How much do I not have for this guy? And to show him at a wit's end, and we're about to get into super panic attack mode, it is a fascinating, gutsy decision by Paul Newman to do this film and Sidney Lumet to direct it, because it is such an exploration, the real exploration of what it's like for a lot of people in certain situations, you know?
I think about the moment in the rehearsal process where Paul Newman went, I'm not there yet. Like, I had to go deeper. I had to find something deeper, because it's not just that he took the gig.
Yeah.
He could have taken the gig and not quite gone here.
Yeah.
And people would have said he was really good. No one would have misjudged his performance. Nobody would have said, they wouldn't have criticized him. They would have thought that's what it was. And he went, no, I had to go deeper. I want to talk about a structural thing too, because it's come up before. Like, I've used this phrase, answering the question in the cut, which is like a thing that I think Steven Spielberg does brilliantly, which is you pose a question at the end of the scene in some way, and then you have a cut to the new scene that tells us the answer to it. That's thinking structurally. This is such an amazing example of how a movie works structurally, not in terms of the dialogue, but in terms of what's happening with the audience. Because first we see him get torn down by the nurse.
Yeah.
Then he's not the one participating in the questioning of Dr. Thompson.
Right.
You know, it's Mickey. He's in the background. And we've already heard the disrespect that Dr. Thompson got from Kincannon.
Yeah.
And then we end the scene with Dr. Thompson not knowing this, what seems like a basic medical term, like a code blue.
Yeah.
And so now what's been planted in the audience is, oh shit, this isn't going to go well.
Yeah.
And then the next thing we hear is, we're going to lose. Is that so the audience is like complete? That's what I mean by it's the answering the question in the cut, is that the audience is actively involved, completing the thought process that leads. It's almost like they have the thought that leads Frank Galvin to say, we're going to lose.
Yeah.
That's how you create powerful moments in the structure of a screenplay.
That's an excellent point. We're all thinking it, and our lead actor voices it right there on the screen for us. And now we, as the audience, have to go, oh, it's real. Like what I'm feeling, the main actor is feeling, then I'm feeling it with him in the movie at the same time. Yeah.
This to me is like the thing I've been struggling to explain about movies and teaching, and in the directing book that I'm working on, of like this. This is where the magic is.
Yeah.
It's not the line, and it's not the shot, and it's not the performance. It's the alchemy that exists with all of those things and the audience member being actively involved in what's happening in the movie.
Well, there must be something you can do.
That's not the point. It's over.
And he closes the hotel door, and he looks at her, and he looks so weak and old and sick and lost in this moment.
It's that moment when you as a child or a teenager and you get caught and there's actually no way out. And you have to actually confront the thing you've been caught for. And you're just sitting there in that moment completely lost and afraid and can't seem to think your way out of it. And so that's the look, completely essentially he's been gutted emotionally, and all his emotional guts are on the floor.
It's so funny. I never saw connections to Rocky until we were talking about it in our first part, but I keep finding more. And one of the big themes of all of the Rocky movies is that Rocky isn't about getting knocked down. Rocky is about getting up.
Right.
You know, it's about what you do at the low point. That's what Rocky's, and that's where we are right now. Yeah. And right now he's down. And at this moment, he's not going to get up.
Oh, God, I never should have taken it. There was no way I could win.
And it's over.
Yeah, it's over.
But I thought it wasn't over until the jury comes in.
Who'd you hear that from?
From you.
Again, this is where I think, as the audience, we know that's why we're active. We remember that line where he says it's all about the jury, you know? And then this speech, and John, my guess is you have been waiting to talk about this moment since we decided to do this movie. Because she's going to give him a pep talk.
So, okay.
Kinda.
Yeah.
You want me to tell you it's your fault. Okay, it probably is. But what are you going to do about it?
And his reaction to that coldness.
I wanted to talk to you. I thought maybe...
You maybe could get some sympathy.
Again, John, how are you feeling in this moment?
Well, I can only speak about it as a whole, right? Not piece by piece. So I can tell you, I love this speech because let me tell you something about life. And I hope some of you know this already. But sometimes in the darkest moments, you don't need someone to hold your hand and stroke your hair and rub your tummy and cuddle you. Sometimes you do need someone to come in with a sharp blade, some ice, and wake your ass up and go, hey, if you were looking to cry and fall on the floor and fall apart, this ain't the place and this ain't what we're doing. You've got to step up, get past it. There's nothing you can do about certain things, but there is other things you can do, and it's time for you to explore it. And I think too much and I as one who suffered through mental health and certainly had, I've spoken about it many times. I still occasionally have to grapple with it. I understand this moment, and it's horrifying. Like, you see Paul Newman's reaction, which again, an incredible performance here. He is at a loss that she would choose this moment to absolutely wade into his nightmare and drown him even farther into the water to get him to react. She's trying to get him to react, which is really curious because later on you find out that she's, doing this thing. He finds out she's been doing this thing. So you wonder what her motivation is here. Is her motivation to continue the case or to let him drown? And ironically, this is the moment where she shows him that she's really in love with him. Yeah, and I think you have to look at it that way, right, Steve? I mean, because someone who wants you to fail is going to let you fail. Someone who actually cares about you and wants you to and sees something within you that has the potential to succeed, they're the ones that are going to come in with that tough love. And if you know how to read it and interpret it and understand where they're coming from and give them some credence, it can help you rise above and fight even stronger or become even stronger at the end. And she essentially sends him into a panic attack, but she's trying to do it from a place of like, I'm not here to hold your hand. You're going to have to fight, and enough with this bullshit, So it's an incredible scene between two fantastic actors.
So if she was fully Team Kincannon and just a spy, she would have just done none of this.
She would have brought him into his bed, stroked him, his hair, and
said, poor baby, you get better luck next time.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you've lost the case.
Totally.
But that's not what she does.
Oh, what makes you so tough?
Maybe I'll tell you that later.
Which can only be, and we're never going to know exactly what her backstory is.
Yeah.
But we know that I feel very strongly that maybe I'll tell you later is a reference to whatever story got her to the point where she took money from Kincannon
Yep.
to spy on him.
100%. She says that when she get caught, I was going to tell you, I was trying to tell you, right? So I think that line links up to what she says later when he confronts her, when he finds out the truth.
Well, and it's interesting too, because if you said to me, and there's a big serious thing, Steve, maybe I'll tell you later, I would focus in on, shit, what's the big serious thing? You're not, but Frank is so in his own world that he just hears the later. So he says, you think you'll be a later? Which is, again, we do all these things as humans, I think, where we're crying out for affection or for the thing that we need. Please, I need you right now.
Yeah.
Please fulfill the need. So when he says, you think there'll be a later, he's hoping she'll say, I love you. That, of course, I care about you.
Yeah.
That's what he wants from her.
Yeah.
But that is not what she gives him.
Not if you don't grow up. You're like a kid. You're coming in here like it's Sunday night. You want me to say you have a fever so you don't have to go back to school.
Fuck, man.
I love it because this is what I've been saying, right, for the two parts, that Frank is his own worst enemy because Frank is kind of a man-child. And he's been allowed to be a man-child ever since the stuff that happened to him because Mickey has essentially kept him afloat, tossing him cases. There's always been someone to bail him out of a situation. So he's never had to fully confront growing up and getting past what happened to him. And that's part of growing up sometimes. People screwing you over, friends, associates, family members fucking you over, and you having to overcome it and find a way out. And that, sadly, is the truth that many people have to go through. And so in this film, that's what we're catching him, where he's still in this place of like, I'm going to still be a drunk and I'm going to casually, pay attention to a case, but I'm going to play pinball and I'm basically floating as a man can float in life sometimes. And she is saying, grow up. She straight up says, grow up, because he has been childish. He has been acting like a fool. He didn't check up on the doctor. He didn't make sure the doctor was going to be able to be there to testify. He didn't check to see if the doctor was black or what race. He didn't do the extra things that you're supposed to do to succeed. He actually just felt that it was going to happen because he was feeling good about everything. And that's not the way to succeed. So I think what she's saying to him is so, so powerful and exactly what he needs to hear, irregardless of the panic attack he's going to happen in the bathroom.
I don't know why this line popped into my head right here, but I always go back to in Full Metal Jacket when what's his name can't make it over the obstacle course.
Oh yeah. Private Pile. Yeah.
And the drill sergeant says,
If God wanted you up there, he would have miracled your ass up there by now, wouldn't he?
I think people walk around expecting God to miracle their ass places all the time.
Yes.
Rather than actually doing the work that is necessary. And I'm always I have this ongoing lifelong debate in my head with Ayn Rand, who I continue to be fascinated by. And one of the things that she says, and my thing about Ayn Rand is that I think she makes a whole bunch of completely accurate observations about life and people and makes horrible, awful, ridiculous conclusions. And one of the things that she says repeatedly, it's in Atlas Shrugged, is reality is real. A lot of people have trouble with the idea that reality is real. That things that, no, this is what's happening. And people keep debating and arguing about it should be like this. It's like, well, it's not like that.
Right.
This is the reality we're in. And that's where Frank is right now at this moment. He's like going, well, no, you don't understand.
Why won't you understand?
I do understand, Frank. Believe me, I do. You say you're gonna lose. Is it my fault? Listen, the damn case doesn't start before tomorrow, and already it's over for you.
It is over.
And then this last piece, there's so much here. She says,
You want to be a failure? Then do it someplace else. I can't invest in failure, Frank, anymore. I can't.
Not anymore is the brilliance that is a window into what might have happened with her and her husband, and I think that's the thing. Not anymore. You know why? Because when I did it last time, this is what it led to. Me having to spy and sleep with somebody in order to get myself back on top. And I'm not doing that again. So again, she loves him. She's falling in love with him, at least. And this is I can't invest in is her way of saying, and I'm sure a lot of our female listeners who are listening to us, if I can cross a line here into the female side of things, a woman doesn't say to you, I can't invest in you if you're this way, if she hasn't already thought about investing in you and seeing a future with you.
Right, of course.
Right? That's a window into their thought. So the fact that she says this, again, Mamet's incredible writing, rather, the fact that she says this is a window into the fact that she had already considered telling him the truth, finding a way out of the situation, and somehow ending up with Frank at the end because she can see a possible future with Frank. And she's trying to get him to step up. Because what if Frank wins? Maybe there's a opening for her to go work with Frank and work with Mickey, and there's a better existence than being a slave, in essence, to Kincannon and him pawning her off on other male clients for her to sleep with, which is horrific, in order to establish herself as a lawyer again. So there's these possibilities that are coursing through her in this moment. But man, it's brutal.
I just had another full epiphany. It's funny. Later on, I had written the note to make a reference to the shark not working in Jaws, which is, to me, it's one of the key things that makes Jaws great is that if the shark had worked, we would have had lots of scenes with a mechanical shark.
Yeah.
But because it didn't work, Spielberg had to invent all these ways for us to imagine the shark, like the buoys and the pier, and of course, John Williams' music. And the shark that we manufacture in our head is always way, way more powerful than watching that mechanical shark.
Yeah.
That's why it works. It's because of what gets manufactured in our head.
Yeah.
The epiphany I just had is I can't invest in failure, Frank, not anymore.
Yeah.
What we could have given the whole backstory. She could have said, oh, I had this marriage, I did this thing, and know all the details of how she invested in failure, how it went wrong, and none of that would be that's all the mechanical shark.
Mm-hmm.
I can't invest in failure, Frank, not anymore. I can't. Is what we build in our brain, is the backstory that we create. And that will always be more powerful than just someone telling us a bunch of facts.
Yeah. Yeah.
We are 100% involved in her backstory, and we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And Paul stands there, and then I love that he says,
Excuse me.
before going to the bathroom. The music, by the way, is super dissonant here. It's Johnny Mandel as the composer. It is really stressful. He goes into the bathroom, and again, it's a full panic attack.
Yep. Full-on panic attack.
Yeah.
Again, the gutsiness of Sean. I had no idea what this was when I was a kid, and seeing it now later in my life in the last few years, seeing it over and over again, like the way they address panic attacks, so bold, so gutsy to include that in a film like this.
And Paul Newman, she's knocking on the door, and Paul Newman saying, in just the voice of it's like all he has just to get these words out.
Frank.
Please don't. Please. Please. Please don't pressure me. Please don't.
Yeah, man.
Here's the thing Lumet said, and again, this is just to contrast him with Coppola or Kubrick or a whole bunch of guys who really would manipulate and mess with their actors to get their performances. Lumet says he would never exploit an actor. He would only want them to reveal what they want to reveal. Wow. This is my guy. That's why this is my guy.
Yeah.
This is how I think.
You get the purity of the performance from that. Yeah.
Yep. It's later. He's smoking and drinking and watching her as she sleeps. And then he leans down and kisses her and walks out. This scene was Paul Newman's idea.
Oh.
Not in the script.
Why?
Because well, let me ask you, before I answer that question, what do you think this scene tells you?
That basically she left him alone to process this. He eventually came out of the bathroom. She was much kinder to him. And then she went to bed. And he, maybe motivated by that brutal speech, is now getting up early to go handle shit. And that's the way I look. And he kisses her in a way of saying, like, thank you. That's how I interpret this whole scene without any words being said between them.
That is exactly why Paul Newman wanted in the movie. That's why I'm glad I asked you rather than just say it. That is it. You described it perfectly.
Really?
and what it is too is like if we had gone from him in the bathroom to him at the courthouse.
Yeah.
We might, again, that would answer the question in the cut. We would, okay, he's back up, ready to fight. And so we would kind of know that. But the element I think we wouldn't have is him acknowledging that she was the one who helped him get there.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have had that. And this is what happens in the editing room. This is why people who look at this from the outside and think, oh, you just know what you're supposed to do, and then you just put it together, and that's what's right. Sidney Lumet says he put this scene in and took it out and put it in and took it out over and over again.
Wow.
It couldn't quite figure out whether or not they needed it. And finally, because he knew Newman wanted it, he kind of went, I am unsure, but Paul is sure.
Right.
And so let's keep it in. And of course, it's absolutely right to have it in,
Agreed.
But it's hard to know. It's really hard to know.
Of course it is. Yeah.
He sees the sister and her husband and says,
I'm going to do the best that I can for you and your sister. I know how much it means to you, and it means that much to me, too.
I think he's reached a level of sincerity.
Mm-hmm.
You know where you're talking about the balance between how much is for him and how him saving his own soul and how much is it actually for them?
Yeah.
I think he's found a new balance here between those two things.
I think if she doesn't have this scene with him, he doesn't do the case.
I agree.
Yeah. I think he might not even show up.
I don't know. He might crawl right into a bottle and Mickey has to finish it for him or something.
Right. Exactly. He doesn't even show up to the case. Yeah.
Sits down. Speaking of Mickey, his next line is, I'm sorry, I apologize for it in advance.
All we have is a witch doctor, huh?
To which I wrote down, racist.
Yeah.
And then the next line, and I'm just going to tell you what my notes were when I heard this line. He says,
Well, look at it this way, Frankie. It's refreshing every time a doctor takes a stand. He's not a Jew.
Oh, Jesus.
and I wrote down, in some bizarre way, the obvious anti-Semitism made the racism feel slightly better. It felt like it balanced it out. That was the reaction I had. These are horrible lines, but they are what they are,
Yeah. And look, we want to make it clear. You can say a racist thing and not be racist, like not overwhelmingly be racist. And I don't think anything about Mickey necessarily radiates racism, but him making these comments, he feels comfortable to say them to his friend in this particular moment and the back and forth. So I'm not excusing the character. I'm just saying there are things here,
You and I would not say these things.
No.
But I think one of the big mistakes that we've made, particularly in the last decade or so, is just said, these are just binary things. You are a racist or you're not.
Right.
If you say a thing that is racist, you are now fully a racist. And it's like, no, that's not, there is a scale between Mickey's comment that made me uncomfortable and the Ku Klux Klan and Nazis. They're not the same thing.
Yeah. Exactly.
The judge enters, we all rise, we hear about what the case is. Frank stands, he's ready for the defense. And now he's going to address the jury.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's a terrible thing to sit in judgment. So much rides on it.
As an actor, I'm trying to think of how I want to ask you this question. What do you think of the choices Newman is making in the way that he delivers this speech?
I think it's perfect for the character, right? Because Frank, in essence, from the conversations with Laura, he has come out a different person from that night, that experience. Now, look, in reality, it takes much longer to turn around stuff after a panic attack situation. But in the concepts of the movie, but in the restrictions of the movie, we have to make it quicker. So the way he's delivering this, I don't think he would have delivered the opening in the same way if they hadn't had that exchange the night before. And the reason is because he is now, in a way, more human, more empathetic, more relatable. In his awkwardness, his occasional misstep, but overall, his earnestness is there for everyone to see as a lawyer. And I think it's such an interesting opening for this case that makes you, as a viewer, go, oh man, he's still a little nervous. I don't know if he's going to be able to knock this out of the park. So you are not, hey, Rocky doesn't look good right now, starting off this fight. I don't know if he's going to make it, but that's what makes us cheer for him even more, because we see an earnestness. Rocky keeps getting up, a determination that I think would not have been there necessarily if he hadn't had the interactions with Laura the night before.
I think in the best lawyer scenes and the best, closing statements, opening statements in a courtroom in a movie, it can't just be about the case.
Right.
It has to be about the person. So when Kevin Costner is making his closing remarks in JFK, part of why this is important to him was because he loved John Kennedy and he feels betrayed by the government that he loves.
Yep.
And so it's personal for him. You know, it's not just facts and figures. This means something. It's important.
Yeah.
I think as much as Laura motivated him from the night before, and he has gotten up off the canvas, I think he's still feeling everything he's feeling, all his uncertainty, all his, a week earlier or before some of the terrible things happened, he would have been aggressive and he would have been more like feigning confidence and faking sincerity like we saw him do for a lot of the movie. There's nothing fake here.
No.
Because he's talking about how big the responsibility of being a juror is.
Yep.
And that's the responsibility he's feeling by representing his clients right now.
It's mirroring back at him. Yeah.
I know that you have thought, how can I be pure? How can I be impartial without being cold? How can I be merciful and still be just?
I love that line. I think that's impartial without being cold is something that we all need to be able to work on.
Yeah.
And he goes through the values of this that he wants from the jury. And then he even talks about these well-respected doctors. And this is serious too. I mean, this is going to change their lives depending on where this case goes.
Yeah.
And then he finally talks about his client.
My client, Deborah Ann Kay, who is deprived of sight, of speech, of hearing, of locomotion, in short, everything that constitutes her life.
That is such a profound way of making that statement, I think.
Yeah.
And then what's really interesting is we cut out in the middle of the speech because it's not important. The filmmaker says, okay, you've seen where he is.
Yep.
And now we're back with some of Kincannon's lawyers and we're hearing some opposition intel because we hear about him going to see Maureen Rooney, that he found nothing there.
How good's your intelligence? Very good.
Which we don't know. We just think, oh, they're watching him. They're spying on him somehow. We don't know anything.
Right.
And what we hear is that they know Dr. Thompson's all he's got.
So they think it's got it in the bag. There's a sense of overconfidence here that you see radiating through them as they're having these conversations back and forth. And it reiterates for us, because we're still not sure where Frank is. It reiterates for us that Frank is on the ropes still.
Yeah. And I would say it's not overconfidence. It's just confidence.
Oh, yeah, fair.
Based on the circumstances that they are, we haven't found Lindsay Krause yet.
Yeah.
It is correct confidence.
Dr. Thompson, just so the jury knows, you never treated Deborah Ann Kay. Is that correct?
That is correct. I was engaged to render an opinion.
Engaged to render an opinion for a price. That is correct? You are being paid to be here?
Just as you are, sir.
He's got a great confidence about him.
Yeah.
He kind of asks about his qualifications and not so subtly condescends to them.
Yeah.
Asks if he knows about Dr. Towler, and Dr. Thompson can't even come up with the title of the book, which is the first sort of thing where you go, maybe this isn't going to go that well. And then he makes this lovely speech. He says,
I'm 74 years old. I'm not board certified. I've been practicing medicine for 46 years, and I know when an injustice has been done.
And Kincannon, I won't say it's dripping with sarcasm, but it's definitely, there's some wonderful condescension here, says,
do you indeed? I bet you do. It's fine. Fine.
And then he accepts him as an expert witness.
And he does it in a way of like, as the king.
Yes.
Right? Saying like, fine, we'll allow this in his point of view, this jester to remain in our kingdom, you know?
Well, and it's also like, sure, I will accept you as an expert after I've destroyed your expertise in front of the jury.
Exactly.
And then this next moment, again, it's the little moments of this movie that are just so delicious because the judge says,
Mr. Galvin, you want to continue now? Oh, we could resume with Dr. Thompson this afternoon.
And it's so obvious from his tone that he's like, I would like a break.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Galvin doesn't pick up on it and says, I'll continue, Your Honor.
Oh, I disagree. I think he totally picks up on it.
And just to poke him.
Just to poke him, yes, because of what happened earlier. And his reaction, the judge's reaction, again, it's just a wonderful performance. Just the great look he gives him, like just utter contempt,
And he asked if he examined the patient, which he does, and they object because he wasn't brought in to examine the patient. He was only brought in to look at the records. So he's got to confine himself to that. He goes, asks him about the records, and he says, that he had cardiac arrest, that caused the brain damage. And then we get into this discussion of exactly how long was the patient asphyxiating on the vomitus in her mask.
Yeah. Dr. Towler has testified that he restored the heartbeat in 3 to 4 minutes. Now, in your opinion, is that an accurate estimate?
In my opinion, it took much longer. 9, 10 minutes. There's too much brain damage.
And then, which I've never seen in any other trial movie ever, the judge stands up and starts questioning Galvin's witness.
Are you saying that a failure to restore the heartbeat within 9 minutes in itself constitutes bad medical practice?
And Galvin is just taken aback and says,
Your Honor.
Yes, Mr. Galvin.
If I may be permitted to question my own witness in my own way.
I'd just like to get to the point, Mr. Galvin.
I am getting
Mr. Galvin, I believe I have the right to ask the witness a direct question.
Yeah, when you deal with corrupt judges, this is the kind of nonsense they pull, because Galvin has ignored his passive-aggressive request for a break so he could go eat his food. He is going to hurry along this testimony so he can get to his food. Frank Galvin be damned.
Would a 9-minute lapse in restoring the heartbeat in and of itself be negligence?
In that small context, I would have to say no.
And the judge happily was like, then you're saying there's no negligence based on my question. I was like, and I wrote down, this is some shitty judging.
Yeah, it is.
Given the limits of your question, that's correct.
The doctors were not negligent.
And then there's a moment where you see him kind of get himself maybe under control, but then again, the next line, it's a fantastic line. He says,
Your Honor, with all due respect, if you're going to try my case for me, I wish you wouldn't lose it.
It's a great. So he gets back at him. So this again, Galvin is growing in strength and confidence from that night, from that interaction, from that exchange. I think Frank Galvin, if this happens to Galvin before the panic attack, before the conversation, before Laura helping him through that, he folds like a deck of cards. But the fact that he's pushing back on the judge and does one up him at the end of this exchange, I think speaks volumes to how he's growing in strength and how he's going to deal with this case.
And we end up in chambers. And at the beginning of the scene, the judge is just all over Galvin. He's talking about disbarring him. And Newman is just facing away. And you could feel like him gathering himself.
Yep.
Look, let's be real clear. Judges have all the power in these situations.
Sure.
And the judge is expecting to talk this lawyer down, to take him down a peg.
I'm an attorney. I'm on trial before the bar, representing my client. My client. You open your mouth, you're losing my case for me.
Now listen to me,
No, you listen to me. All I want on this trial was a fair shake. Okay? Push me into court 5 days early. I lose my star witness, and I can't get a continuance, and I don't care. I'm going up there, I'm going to try it, I'm going to let the jury decide.
And it goes back to what he had said to Laura.
Yes.
Which Laura then references, right, in the breakdown. I thought you said a jury would decide, right? And so he's back in that place. This is a stronger Frank Galvin now coming in, and we're about to get, I think, the cherry on top of this confrontation between these two.
Well, and it's funny because this whole time, the judge has had higher status than Galvin.
100%.
And has been taking him down and poking at him and what kind of a failure of a lawyer is, all that stuff. And now we're going to get the reverse because he says,
Look, Galvin, many years ago.
Come on. Hey, don't give me that shit about you being a lawyer, too. I know about you. You couldn't hack it as a lawyer. You were a bag man for the boys downtown, and you still are. I know about you.
Bang!
Yeah.
Remember, Frank Galvin showing up late. Remember him and Kincannon, the judge and Kincannon, essentially running a two-man game on him. And here is Frank Galvin finally standing. Here is Frank Galvin growing up. And because this is what happens in the adult world. You got to stand up for yourself and you got to fight. That's the way the world is built. And people are going to take advantage of you if you let them. And that's what he's saying, because before he was being ridiculed and made fun of. And the judge coming into the chambers immediately goes back to that old stuff that he used with him when they first met up and about getting disbarred. And remember Frank's reaction in that? He was like, well, I wasn't disbarred technically. You know, he was like trying to stake his. Here he's saying it very strongly, very firmly. And then even goes back at the character on the judge. Whereas he was passive aggressive in the last exchange when he was like, yeah, I bet you would. Here he's like, no, I know about you, you sack of shit. I know exactly what you've done. I know where you've been. I know all the stories about you. You think you know all the stories about me? I know all the stories about you, you motherfucker. So don't play with me. And I love that. And Kincannon is just sitting there going like, he don't know what to say. And I think inside it starts to become a little bit afraid that this is a different guy than he anticipated, you know?
It's so funny. So first of all, so many Rocky things are popping into my mind because they're all the moments where it's like it becomes real. Like Rocky has to believe in himself at a certain level. And like we just had the Laura scene is the scene on the beach with Talia Shire in Rocky 3. Like we just had like the get up off your ass, the what are you doing here thing. And the other thing too, I think one of the reasons that Kincannon is looking at this scene is like, what the hell's going on? Is Kincannon might be a great lawyer, but he's not a street fighter. He didn't come up in the streets. Frank did. And I think this judge did too. Like this judge went to, he was more like Frank in some ways and then went on the take from the boys downtown, whatever exactly that means, and has now been a judge and is feeling himself a lot. But man, Frank is coming right at him.
I'm going to ask for a mistrial. I'm going to request that you disqualify yourself from sitting on this case. I'm going to take a transcript of the trial to the Judicial Conduct Board and ask that they impeach your ass.
You aren't going to get a mistrial, boy. We're going back there this afternoon and we're going to try this case to the end. Now you get out of here before I call a bailiff and have you thrown in jail.
It's like in Rocky 1, where there's no way that Rocky can compete with Apollo Creed. He's just taken punishment and then he knocks him down for the first time Apollo's ever been knocked down. And we suddenly realize we got a fight on our hands.
Yeah.
That's how this feels to me.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And the fact that the judge gives some lame thing at the end, like, you get out of here, I'm going to call the bailiff. It's absolute. And then the fact that Frank turns the tables on him by saying, I'm going to get a mistrial. He's in essence challenging the judge's credibility by doing this. And the judge is now even more committed to this case. Remember, he wanted to kill this case and move on and do some settlement. Now he's like, no, we're seeing this to the end. So in a way, Frank has tricked him to play his game by being like, I'm going to go mistrial. I'm going to get this, I'm going to get a new judge. And he's like, no. And so by doing that, in a way, he's tricked the judge to continue with this case and not look for any opportunity to kill it, that he's going to continue the case. And that is a strong play from Frank in this moment.
But then in the next moment, he walks back out into the courtroom and you immediately see the oh shit on his face.
Yeah.
And what have I done? And it's funny because initially he was passive aggressively poking at the judge in ways that were all working against him. We were like, you're an idiot. Why are you doing these things? Yeah. Now he aggressively did, which I think was the right thing to do.
I agree.
But he still only has Dr. Thompson. He doesn't have anything else. And the sister and the husband come and they're like, so you have other tactics, right? Which he really doesn't, other than hoping that he can take down their witnesses.
Right.
Which is where we go to next, which is Dr. Towler is on the stand. And Frank, his tactic with Dr. Towler at first is to ask a question and then immediately interrupt him, ask another question and immediately interrupt that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, these notations stop 4.5 minutes after Deborah Ann Kay's heart stopped. 4.5 minutes after her heart stopped.
Well, as I say,
and they resume 3 minutes later.
I don't think this is a successful tactic for him.
Well, he's just trying to get the doctor off kilter.
Off his balance.
Yeah.
But and what's interesting, though, this is exactly why Kincannon prepared this doctor so well, and he really doesn't take him off his balance.
No.
And we're talking about the distance, whether it was 3 minutes that she was in cardiac arrest or 9 minutes, and what could cause brain damage. And the judge is intervening to actually get a question answered, in which case, at this moment, I'm on the judge's side because Frank really isn't letting that witness answer anything.
Well, you're not supposed to, right? You do know that, right? Like you're supposed to get them to answer the question in a certain way to fit your case, right?
Of course, absolutely.
All right.
And the judge at this point is going, look, you have to let your witness answer the question. That's why I'm saying I agree with the judge in this case.
I'm saying I don't. I'm saying let Frank do what he's doing because he's letting Kincannon do what he wants to do in this situation.
Okay. Well, and this is why the courthouse of John Stephen Rocha will be operated in a very different way from the courthouse of Stephen Robert Morris. This is just very different. I respectfully disagree, Your Honor.
Brain damage could have... It didn't necessarily take 9 or 8 minutes. It could have been caused in 2.
Wait a minute. You're saying that her brain damage could have been caused by being deprived of oxygen for 2 minutes?
Yes.
Why is that?
You remember how I said that I remembered almost everything about this movie, except for one thing? This is one I've remembered forever.
Yeah.
I've always remembered this idea. Yeah. Never ask a question that you don't already know the answer to.
Yeah.
It's right there on her medical chart.
He leans forward and the camera is tracking around. It's very dramatic. And he says,
she was anemic. Less blood, less oxygen.
And Mickey just puts his head in his hands.
Yeah.
The level of the like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Because we were all charged up after the scene in the judges' chambers.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's all deflated.
Right.
And there's a fantastic shot outside the courtroom, low angle, below this balcony, looking up at Mickey and Frank. And as Dr. Thompson comes into that empty space, it's just a perfectly framed shot.
I didn't do too well for you.
And he's right.
Yeah.
He didn't do that well for him. And we really wanted him to. And we really like him. Yeah. But yeah, he didn't do that well for him. And he's offering to stay, and they're kind of saying, no, you can go.
You know, Mr. Galvin, sometimes people can surprise you. Sometimes they have a great capacity to hear the truth.
This is an incredibly important moment to Sidney Lumet because this is his philosophy, that little bit of hope. And one interesting thing that he said in the behind the scenes, Sidney Lumet loves jury duty.
Wow.
He loves meeting the people. He loves watching people do the right thing and get together for a common good. And I just like, man, Sidney Lumet's a good guy.
I do want to bring something up, and I want to make sure we address it because I think it's important. But, you know, this is the magical Negro trope, isn't it? Like, he comes in, there's racism on both sides towards him. He acquits himself well. He's a very well-spoken, intelligent man. And yet at the end, he's the one saying, I didn't do too well for him. But he did. The problem is the judge. The problem is the judge came in, tried to limit tried to create a scenario that went against Frank's case. So he did everything great. And then at the end, he leaves with these pearls of wisdom for the white lead. So, you know, when people talk about the magical Negro, these are the examples that people refer to when they talk about films, looking back on them. And so this is an excellent example of it.
I think Frank failed him too. I think
100%.
Because Frank, like, I don't know exactly what the rules are, but there were other questions he could ask.
Yeah.
You know, the judge can't stop him from saying,
right,
well, you say it was the wrong anesthetic. I think the other problem is both Dr. Gruber and Dr. Thompson, all these guys are wrong. It wasn't the wrong anesthetic. It was the meal.
It all went down to the meal and the changing of which we don't know at this point, right? When we're watching it for the first time. I don't like the fact that Mickey never turns around to thank Dr. Thompson too. I think that's kind of a prick move from him. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So we're we're outside walking out the stairs in the snow and Laura is coming up.
What are you going to do now?
I don't have a goddamn idea.
I've been there, man. I've been to what are you going to do now? I don't have a goddamn idea so many times. Yeah. Particularly directing a movie where you're just like, because actually the perfect example, because then you got to get up and you got to figure out an idea and keep going.
You know, you broke the first rule I ever taught you in law school. You never ask a question unless you have the answer to it.
Mickey is rubbing his shoulders.
There'll be other cases.
There are no other cases. This is the case.
And then repeats.
There are no other cases. This is the case.
And the camera cranes down to below them, looking up. Like we move from the weak positioning, high angle, to the heroic positioning of low angle as he repeats.
There are no other cases. This is the case.
There is no tomorrow.
There is no tomorrow.
There's a very real possibility that Rocky stole this entire movie for Rocky 3. That Stallone stole this entire movie.
What year's Rocky 3?
83.
Isn't it 82?
This is 82.
Oh.
So it's very possible. Even the rubbing of the shoulders, like Paulie rubbing Rocky's shoulders in essence after a fight or before the fight. So like in a way there is similar. There's no betrayal obviously in the movie as there is in this movie, but there are elements. And I would not be surprised if Stallone was still working on the script, saw this movie and maybe made some connections and adjustments for Rocky 3. I don't know.
I mean, I never made the connection until we started talking about it, but and it's part of why I love Rocky, the character, and I love Frank Galvin for all his flaws, because I like stories about guys who get off the mat.
Yeah.
Yeah. As I said just a moment ago, there was one thing in this movie that I had completely forgotten, and that is the scene we're in now.
Yeah.
Which is we're with Kincannon. We're staying very conspicuously only on him.
Yeah.
I know how you feel. You don't believe me, but I do know.
And he tells this story about when he was a young lawyer and he had told his boss that he did his best. And his boss said, "You're not paid to do your best. You're paid to win." Which, by the way, I can only hear Sean Connery in The Rock at this moment. Your best.
And that's what pays for this office. Pays for the pro bono work that we do for the poor.
I love that he throws that in, because that's always I'm sure you do that pro bono work for the poor, but you're not getting any sympathy from me for that one. Yeah. And we still don't know who he's talking to. He's going on about all the things that winning pays for, the whiskey, the clothes. And as he does that, he brings his glass over and hands it to Laura.
Yeah.
I was so shocked watching this again because I had completely forgotten. And I had no clue. I had zero clue. I didn't see this coming in any way. And it is so absolutely crushing to see.
Yeah, because she's crushed. And you can see
in
the Charlotte Rampling performance. She's emotional. She's got tears in her eyes. You can tell she had tears in her eyes. She's also ashamed. And the way Lumet frames the camera movement to her sitting there, and then we see him move behind her like a pimp, putting the money in her purse.
Yep.
Because that's what essentially he's doing. Is she's a prostitute, and now I'm not saying she is a prostitute. I'm saying the interaction, the transaction here is very similar to that, and she's ashamed of it. And you can tell she's emotionally overwhelmed by the situation because, as I said before, she's clearly developed feelings for Frank. And now this is not just a thing of taking money to screw with him. Now she's fucking over someone who is just as low as she was. And so she's having a lot of internal internal battles within herself about the whole situation. And having him come into frame, put the money in her purse, and then come and sit next to her, it's very creepy. And it's very almost rapey. And I think this interaction between them, I thought this time around watching it, that it was probably the interaction they had the first time when she showed up, despondent, emotional, desperate, and he took advantage of her desperation to put her in this situation so that, and promised her, you can be a lawyer someday for me, and you just have to do this thing. And so I think we're seeing a mirror of that first interaction between them, but it's much later now, and it's a completely different reason why she's emotional.
So as I said in our first part, I am not as 100% certain as you are that Kincannon's orders were specifically to sleep with Frank. It might have been. It's certainly possible that it was. They definitely were to flirt with Frank, date Frank, learn everything you can about Frank, hang around Frank. Absolutely. Whether or not it was his choice that she sleep with him the first time or her choice is where I'm more ambiguous than you. But everything you describe, I totally agree with. Here's the weird thing. So I said that I had no memory of this scene.
Yeah.
In the assistants, here is the setup. There's Carl and Sarah, who had been girlfriend, and their big fight is Carl's like, you need to do anything to succeed. And Sarah's like, I only want to succeed the right way. And we know that Joe Mantegna's character, the big producer, sleeps with young actresses. And we have this montage where Carl is about to do whatever is necessary in order to get a part and decides not to. And we're watching intercut with Joe Mantegna pouring a drink for someone at the bar, moving over towards a couch. We do not see the person's face. And then he sits down and hands the drink over, and we realize that it's Sarah. It's almost exactly shot the same way as this scene is shot. Wow. Now, I had no memory of the scene, but I wonder if maybe it affected me so much that I put it in a similar thing in my own movie.
Could be,
because it's not shot for shot. They're not exactly the same, but it's really similar in the way it's set up.
Yeah. Wouldn't be surprised. We're always influenced subconsciously by things
Yeah.
that we experience. Yeah.
We're back in the office with Mick, and we're talking about this nurse and why she won't testify, and that she's protecting someone, and like who she's protecting. And we go, it can't be the doctors, because if she were trying to protect the doctors, she would have testified. She'd go up on the witness stand.
Read me what she said.
And I love that Paul Newman that Frank Galvin has to recite verbatim this horrible thing that this person said to him that cut him so deeply.
Yeah.
You guys are a bunch of whores.
Loyalty. Don't care who you hurt. You guys got no loyalty.
And that's when they realize it must be loyalty to one of the nurses. Can't be one of the nurses in the operating room because they're all testifying. And then they go, the admitting nurse, which finally leads them back to this piece of paper, which Frank is reading through.
How old are you? How many children do you have?
And then he sees something, and we don't know what he sees.
Right.
He gets up, grabs his coat, hands it to Mickey, who reads the same thing we just heard. How old are you? How many children do you have? Then he has a reaction, and finally he says,
when did you last eat?
I think it is so much better to do it this way. Because there was no reason why Frank Galvin couldn't have said, when did you just last eat?
Right.
But again, this engages us.
Yeah.
Because we know he saw something. We're wondering what he saw. And then we go through it again, and then Mickey reads it, and then everything connects to us.
Yeah.
And now we're going to get Frank's and some more subterfuge, essentially, because he shows up at the hospital. He goes into the chapel where he kneels and crosses himself because, again, Frank is a Catholic. That's really important, too. And then we realize that it's because the Nurse Rooney, is actually there praying.
The way this is filmed, I think we have to take a moment and really appreciate the way this is filmed, because we're watching him come in, and then he fades into the background, and we have her in the foreground, and it's such a great reveal to the audience, right? Right after what Mickey has just said to us, which is giving us the clue of what's happening, we follow him into this chapel. And then he fades into obscurity for a little bit, out of focus. And we see her because she's the important one now. And we're like, oh, what's there to discover here? And as she walks out, the fact that she is kneeling down in front of the, doing the thing at the end there, he knows exactly where to place himself.
Yep.
And we're shooting it from behind. And we don't see him grab her from the front. We see him grab her from behind. And then they cut to where she reacts to it, which is great. So in a way, we're both there and outside of it at the same time. And I think it's so well shot to keep us on the edge of our seat in that way. People talk about slow movies or movies where there's not a lot of action. The camera and editing can make it feel like there's a lot of action in a film where there's not a lot of action because of how they take if the film is working, how they take our attention and move it close and pull it back and move it close and pull it back. That makes us feel like we're on an action-filled ride through a film that wouldn't normally be seen as an action-filled film, you know?
Oh, Miss Rooney, I understand what you're doing, and I just wanted you to know that it's okay.
What are you talking about?
Oh, about Kate and Costello.
It's a great con artist move, really.
I just saw her.
In New York?
And he's all of a sudden like, oh, gotta go. Because that's the piece of information he didn't have. In this next sequence, there's so much going on. And it is so fascinating. And if you read books on screenwriting or on writing for television, you hear about A stories and B stories and C stories and what they are and how they interact. And I'm not saying that there are not good reasons to have quote unquote A stories and B stories.
Yeah.
There are. But they can be done in a very ham-fisted way, where it's sort of and bad episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation are always good examples of this, where it's like there's a story about some aliens we're dealing with, and Alexander is having trouble at school, and Worf has to talk to his teachers, and they're entirely disconnected.
Yeah.
And you cut between them, but they don't really have anything to do with each other.
Yeah.
And frequently the one of those two stories ends up feeling like filler or just kind of dumb in bad episodes of Next Generation. I love Next Generation. I love the characters. I'm not saying it's a bad show. I'm saying there are episodes where this is very noticeable.
Yeah.
When it's done really well, they weave in perfectly so that you are involved in both simultaneously and each one supports the other. So we have two things going on. We have sort of the plot which is, oh, we're starting to find out more about this nurse who was the admitting nurse, and this must be the key thing to win the case. So that's what Mickey and Frank are working on in the office. But we also just had this huge reveal that Laura is in fact the spy. And that she has betrayed Frank, and everything about the relationship has been thrown into question. It's deeply emotional, and we're like, oh my God, what's going to happen here? So it's almost like foreground and background. In the foreground, we have them trying to find this nurse.
Yes.
But then in the background, the emotional story walks in because Laura enters the room with coffee. And as she's moving through it, I think we as the audience are filled with turmoil because we're like, oh, they're starting to get towards the nurse, and oh, fuck, what's going to happen with this Laura deal?
Right. And by the way, this is all shot as one shot, which I think is great.
Yep.
It's her walking in, because the scene begins and ends with her walking in and out of that same door. And like you said, we're now caught up in them trying to find out more about this nurse. She's walking in with coffee, sandwiches, and she says to Frank while he's on the phone, I got to talk to you. I want to talk to you. And he said, I can't right now. I'm on the phone. So there is this desire to tell him the truth. So again, people wanted to hate, but the character is legitimately caught in a shitty situation and is not trying hard enough, but certainly trying to find a way to tell him. And those of us who've had a secret to tell or maybe can watch it from the outside, it's not always easy to tell the secret. No. And you've got to find the right moment. And when you do, you hope that you're finding the right moment where you'll have the least amount of emotional damage administered. And so I think in that moment, she's like, okay, I found my courage. I'm going to tell him now. But he can't. He's on the phone. He doesn't have time to hear her. But you see she's really aggravated, walks to the wash basin, washes her hands or whatever. And then Mickey says, hey, why? And she's staring at him when she comes out of the wash bay, staring at Frank, looking at him like, how do I tell him? I'm going to lose him. If I tell him, I'm going to lose him. Do I tell him? Do I not tell him? He's going to find out. What happens if he finds out? Like there's all these thoughts going on, which is why Charlotte Rampling is such a fantastic actress. It's all in her face. And then Mickey says to get the cigarettes, right? And so she's kind of walking in a daze by the time she leaves the office, because that was the moment. And that's the tragedy of this relationship. That was the moment. She was ready to tell him, but he couldn't take a moment to listen to her because they're knee deep in the case.
Yeah.
And it's just tragic. It's not her fault. It's just timing, and it's tragic,
Well, and I think it's so important to remember how this movie started because, as we talked about, it's the anti-Save the Cat, where Frank is doing all these things which are fairly unsavory. It's like if this, I brought up Kevin Costner and JFK. That's the crusading district attorney who believes in doing the right thing. And sometimes he gets in fights with his wife, and sometimes there's things, he's not perfect, but his whole, I am the hero doing the right thing.
Yeah.
That ain't Frank Galvin.
No.
Frank Galvin started off this movie, when the nurse called him a whore, it's like, well, he started off the movie lying to bereaved families that he knew the dead father when he really didn't.
Right.
I mean, it is a pretty scummy thing that he was doing, and that was his life.
Right.
I'm not saying it's exactly the same or as bad as what Laura has done, but it ain't that far from it. You know what I mean? He was starting in a dark, unethical place when he began this movie where he didn't care about his clients. And that makes this much more complicated. I love, too, the moment. And again, it's, as you pointed out so well, it's like, because it's in one shot, well, then the camera has to decide who we're going to pay attention to.
Right.
Normally in movies, you pay attention to who's talking. That's just a basic normal rule. This scene, it follows Laura into the bathroom, and we're not on the people that are talking, calling, trying to find the nurse, all that stuff. We're just sticking with her as she moves through the space. And as you said, Mickey asked to not forget cigarettes on the way out. Yeah. One of the greatest plants in any movie ever.
Yep.
Because just a throwaway.
Yep.
We're not thinking about it. She leaves. She goes off to a diner and picks up some cigarettes. And then she looks at a payphone.
Right. She slowly walks out of the diner with the cigarettes in her hands. She starts to move towards the stairs, then is looking at the payphone, then walks over to the payphone. And we don't know if she calls or she doesn't call, which I love, right? We don't know what she does in this moment. She just stares at the payphone. If I call, I'm even more connected to Kincannon. If I don't call, maybe there's a chance that I can have a future with Frank. And that's basically that. And even if you want to go deeper and remove Frank from the equation, if I make this call, I'm beholden to this person for the rest of my life or for the foreseeable future, and that's Kincannon. If I don't make the call, I reclaim a little bit more of my own independence and agency. And I think that's what you see on Charlotte's face there in that moment. And Lumet is a genius for having it remain an open question for us for now.
And I mean, we've been talking about Kincannon being the devil. She has literally sold her soul to the devil and is trying to figure out what to do about this deal. And I go back to Frank Galvin at the beginning of this movie. If he had gotten an opportunity to in some way sell his soul to the devil, to Kincannon, to make a buck and get back on top, would he have done it?
100%. At the beginning of this movie, yes. Because he's a child.
I think now that Frank has something to go after, which is this nurse, he knows he's onto something. Yeah. I think Paul Newman looks younger and more energetic.
Yeah.
And I love, by the way, that just putting the beer under the chin, it's all these little behaviors like we talked about with Charles Durning dipping his fingers in the water in The Sting. It's little behaviors that sometimes make great performances.
Yep.
And then the mail slot pops open and some mail comes in and he grabs the mail and he sees the phone bill.
Just so we're clear, this is all illegal.
Sure.
Doing.
You mean breaking into someone's mailbox?
Yes. And stealing
yeah, because that's what he does. He goes, same street we were on before, finds Nurse Rooney's mailbox, grabs a screwdriver or whatever, cracks it open, and finds her phone bill. Looks at the phone bill, and we see a whole bunch of numbers in New York City. Calls the number, a woman answers. He pretends that he's the subscription department of Nurse Quarterly. And they found her. This is Caitlin Costello, now Caitlin Price.
Yeah.
And after some bullshit, he finds out that she is in New York working at the Chelsea Child Care. He's got her. He's found her.
Yeah.
Cut to the airport. He walks up to, it's always fun watching, pre 9/11, how airports worked. That people just walked in and got on plane. It was all so much easier. And he gets to a payphone to call back to the office, and Laura answers.
Yeah.
And again, we've always, we talked about this many times. In this particular one, we choose not to hear Frank's voice. We're only hearing Laura's voice, where she hears that he's going to New York, and she says,
"Yeah, listen, Frank. I have to be in New York about some business. Yeah, I have some papers to sign about my divorce. Could we meet
you got
there?"
a cigarette?
And while this is happening, Mickey asks her for a cigarette because he asked her to get some cigarettes
earlier. Yeah, just a few minutes ago in the movie. Yeah, exactly.
And she's busy making plans with Frank about where we're going to meet. And I'm going to ask you, but I already know the answer. What is it she wants to do when she meets Frank in New York?
I think she wants to tell him the truth.
She wants to tell him the truth.
Yeah. Again, this is the great tragedy of the movie, which I think the movie is nowhere near as impactful or powerful without this tragic romance in the film. It's so important.
You know what's weird? It's like Romeo and Juliet, because Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy of timing.
Right. Yeah.
If they get there just at a different time, then the plan to fake the death and everything, that might work.
Yep.
If she got to talk to him before Mickey got to talk to him,
yep,
then maybe they could make this work somehow.
Right. Right. And you can make a case. Look, she had ample opportunity to tell him.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, the timing wasn't there.
She's done a horrible thing.
Yeah.
But people do a horrible thing. And anyone who's been in a situation where they had a thing they had to apologize for, most people didn't apologize for it right away.
Yeah.
They had some amount of time that they needed to get to the place to do it,
Agreed.
So they're making their plans, and as they're making their plans, Mickey really needs a cigarette. And so he's rummaging around in her purse to find the smokes. Instead finds an envelope with the Kincannon legal firm letterhead.
Yeah.
And we see just that extreme close-up of the fingers reaching into the envelope, and he pulls out a check for $575 made out from Kincannon to Laura, and he looks at her, and as he is looking at her, this is what's amazing, is having these layers going on. She says,
"I feel the same way, Frank. Yeah, I know."
What did Frank just say?
Probably, "I love her. I love you."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at the moment that Frank, whose voice we don't hear, might very well be on the other end of the phone saying, "I love you," or "Thank you," or "You saved my life," or something really, really big, we are visually seeing the evidence of her betrayal.
Yeah. And by the way, was $575 that much in 1982? I imagine
with the wonderful power of the internet, let's find the answer to that question, shall we?
I mean, because I would think thousands of dollars would be the way to go. Oh. It's
how much is it?
$1,876. Okay, $2,000 a week maybe to seduce this guy.
I mean,
I'm okay with that, actually. That's a good going rate, to be honest.
So, John, if I needed you to, I'm not saying that there's another podcast that I needed to get some information on, but you're willing to make that kind of move for $2,000 a week? Is that?
I mean, if I was in her situation, maybe, but not right now, no.
And I love Mickey saying, as he's processing all this,
Laura, I'm going to go out and get some cigarettes.
Let me ask you something.
Yes.
What did you think watching it this time with the betrayal? Did you think she's going there to meet him, to tell him, or did you think she was going there to get the information? Because the fact that they have look at the payphone, for anybody watching it the first time, I think you question why she's going to New York, you know?
I think, again, this movie just thrives in ambiguity.
Yes.
And I hadn't thought about the fact that, yes, you could say, oh, she knows that Frank has probably found the nurse.
Yeah.
And therefore she is going to New York to find out about the nurse and meet. It's absolutely 100% possible. I don't believe that at all.
Right.
I am very convinced that she's going there to tell him. And it goes back to the scene where she was so harsh with him in the world's most brutal pep talk. Yeah. But you and I both felt that she only would do that if she loved him,
right? And
is not being a spy anymore in that way. So to me, no, she's going to tell him.
And the fact
it's also more tragic. It's also more tragic. If she's going to spy on him, it's not as tragic.
Right.
If she's going to tell him the truth because she loves him, it's a much more tragic story.
I agree. And the fact that they don't know about this nurse before the court case or before the trial, and she shows up, proves that she didn't call Kilcannon at the payphone. Like, she didn't call him.
Right. Oh, yeah, totally. And so we're at this playground in New York, and there is Caitlin Price, played by Lindsay Krause.
Yeah, the great Lindsay Krause. For those who don't know, Lindsay Krause appeared in a number of films. Her first film was a film we did, Steve, All the President's Men.
Right.
She was also nominated for Best Supporting Actress for Places in the Heart. She was in Slapshot with Paul Newman in 1977 earlier. Between the Lines, Prefontaine, The Insider. She was married to David Mamet in 1977. So I don't know if he wrote this part for her or how she got the role itself, but clearly, someone who had a lot of love for David Mamet. She was the star of House of Games, which I think is one of those great David Mamet films that people don't talk about often enough. And she was in Hill Street Blues. She played one of the first ever lesbians on screen as a lesbian police officer in season 6. You've also seen her in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, in Alias, CSI, Criminal Minds, Law and Order, ER, Millennium. And she's also got a very strong resume on stage as well. So just one of these phenomenal actresses that you've seen in a million things. But whenever she shows up, she brings such a gravitas and a strength to her performances that it's always a joy when you stumble upon any piece of material that she's doing.
I couldn't find an answer because I had that same thought as you about, wait, did she get the part because of Mamet? But she did work with Lumet before in Prince of the City.
Right. Prince
the year
was
before.
Great. Yeah.
So I think it was probably a little bit of both. I think, every single actor that's come in has been phenomenal, and Lindsay Krause is no different. Every supporting performance is great. She's playing with the kids and he's chatting with her, and he's made up some story about his nephew who is coming to visit, and he might need this preschool or whatever it is. And so he's kind of moving in a sort of awkward kind of way to get to the point.
What'd you do? Did you stop?
Yes.
Why'd you do that?
And as he says that, we go to a close-up, which Lumet is very sparing in his use of close-ups in the movie. So when he uses them, they're there for a reason.
Yep.
And we go to the close-up, and we can see just perfectly out of his lapel pocket is that Boston plane ticket. And she reacts and looks at his scruffy face, and we know that she knows.
Yeah.
And not only do we know that she knows, but we know that he knows that she knows.
Yeah.
And he steps closer and says, in the most straightforward, honest way you could hear,
help me.
She knew this day was coming.
Yeah.
Right? At some point. And I love that the shot is, her reaction is such a great performance in that moment. It's just change. It's so believable. And then when they come back to her, after he says, will you help me? You see that she knows this day was coming. And then they as you said, Lumet holds the close. He holds the close-up as she stares at him because she's not going to do it unless she believes in Frank. She's not going to do it unless she sizes this guy up and sees if it's worth it, because she doesn't have to do it. And so just staring at him, I love that they leave the shot with her staring at him as if, okay, do I believe you? You know, and I think it's great.
Well, and again, this is all the answering questions in the cut. It's like, we don't need to, we're going to leave before we get her answer.
Yeah.
Him saying, will you help me, is all we need to get.
Yeah.
And then we cut to, apparently everyone's going to New York these days because there's Mickey. We're in this high angle.
Hey, people have a lot of expendable income back then, apparently, because it's not cheap to just go to New York randomly out of the blue,
On a plane.
On a plane.
So out of here, lost or something? Frankie, we got to talk.
And we're in this high angle and we see them walking together. We do not hear what they're saying. Frank slows down and stops and backs away. And you see Mickey explaining, we hear none of this, and then he runs forward. So Sidney Lumet said he had no idea how he came up with this idea to film it this way. And then years later, he's watching, I think, late night TV, and a movie comes on, and he realizes what movie he totally stole this from, which is On the Waterfront with Brando talking to Eva Marie Saint. Right. And he's called this is an unintentional homage, which I think is what I was saying with the assistants. I have no idea that maybe I'd stolen this, but maybe I did.
So let's talk about this. Do you like that they...
Yes.
Yeah, me too. But the running away, once again, right? Frank has been knocked just when he's feeling good. I found the nurse.
Yep.
She's going to do it, or we assume she's going to do it. Here comes something else to knock him out of the blue. Now we get to this scene. So please.
By the way, so remember I said that I had written down the shark in Jaws? This is what I wrote down, the shark in Jaws. It's so much better for us not to hear the dialogue and create it in our minds than it is to actually hear the scene.
I agree.
There was nothing we could hear dialogue-wise that would be better than just watching it.
And again, what I said was so great about Sidney. Pulls us in, takes us out. And we, in the hands of a great director, they know exactly when to pull us in and take us out, and let our own minds do the work of what happened in their interactions by watching these men physically interact with each other with that news. It's great.
So we're in this restaurant where they had agreed to meet. He walks in, he spots her, and I'm going to read to you what I see as the beat work, because there's no dialogue here. But the camera pushes in, she looks at him and realizes 100% that he knows.
Yeah.
And he stares at her for a moment, and in that moment, I don't know that he 100% believed Mickey when he heard the story.
No.
Like, he just heard the story. And then he's looking at her and realizes that what Mickey told him is true.
Yeah.
And she sees that realization on his face, and she starts to shake.
Yeah.
And he walks forward. And I didn't remember this either.
That he hit her? Oh, yeah.
And he hits her hard the way they stage it. Now, it's not like Godfather 2 where an actor really hit an actor. This is, staged.
Right.
But it is a hit.
Right.
Zanuck and Brown, our producers, were 100% against this being in the movie.
Of course. You can't have your leading man slap a woman. Right.
Paul Newman fought for this to be in the movie.
Good.
They decided to leave it in. They thought that women would all turn on Paul Newman. Sidney Lumet said in their first test screening that women applauded in this moment. So...
Listen. We at the Cine-Files do not advocate violence against
exactly
women, right? However, I'm not surprised that women applauded this because women know women, and women know some of the shit women pull. And of course, you're not supposed to physically hit a woman, nor should you. But in a situation like this, when she took advantage of his low point, she's been betraying him. And look, I get it. Frank's an imperfect person, an imperfect protagonist. And he's a child in many ways initially in the movie. But like this moment of realization that the one person, and this is why it's a colossal mindfuck and why you need it. The one person who gave him his spine back is the one person who he finds out was betraying him. And if this is Frank before the panic attack and conversation with Laura that night, Frank falls apart in a hotel room, drinking, crying. Frank slapping her is important. It's Frank saying, no one's going to fuck with me anymore. I am back. I've gone through the looking glass. I have gone through the labors of Hercules, and I've come out stronger. Frank, at the beginning of the movie, would never have slapped Laura. Frank, after the interaction with Laura, who has given him his strength, it's an extension of that. And this is why Laura says, leave him alone. I like the fact, though, that this is really smart in the movie, that other men come in to stop him, just to show that this is not something that men are like cool with other men doing, which I think is a conscious, really smart move by Sidney Lumet. And so this whole thing is important for how they tell it. Now, of course, some of you may say, oh, I don't like violence and should have been in there. I totally respect that. But I think with the story they're telling here, this makes sense for Frank to do this. And Frank has to do this. This is no different than him confronting the judge and going back and forth with the judge. Because I'm sure if he could, he'd knock the judge's lights out. But in this moment, he has to do something to like reaffirm his strength in the situation and not fall apart. And this is what he chooses to do.
So I have obviously, people have brought up the fact that I'm always fascinated with the ethical choices characters make in film. And that's not changing at all. And obviously I agree with your Surgeon General's warning that the Cine-Files does not support or condone violence against women.
Absolutely not.
For me, I mean, I don't support or condone violence in general.
True.
And I also, and it's not just a man shouldn't hit a woman. It's stronger people and weaker, a child, a mom and her kid, like wherever the power levels, those are problems.
Yeah.
Those aren't the things that are in my mind for a decision like this in a film.
Yeah.
The things for me in my mind is, number one, is this motivatable?
Yeah.
Do you believe that this character would do this thing at this moment? Yeah. That's mostly what you're doing when you're writing, when you're acting, you're directing, is you create a situation and then you figure out how your characters respond, your particular characters with those personalities respond under those circumstances. Right. And so is this motivatable that Frank Galvin would hit this woman at this moment? 100%. It is fully motivatable. Yeah. It makes perfect sense for his character. And then the second question I ask is this dramatic? Does this have emotional resonance? Yeah. Is it powerful? It's not a question of whether or not it's right or wrong. We can sit back and discuss the right or wrongness of it, of whether or not his character should have done it. That is not the point. Right. The point, and we can discuss those things, but the point is it motivatable? 100% yes. Yeah. Is it dramatic? 1,000% yes. It is an unbelievably powerful moment in the film, and the aftermath is unbelievably powerful because men rush up. First of all, I think he's completely spent. He's not going to hit her again.
Oh no, of course
he's
not.
Done. Yeah. I think he is filled with all these conflicting emotions. The anger is still there, but he's never. He loves this woman. He just hit her. Yeah. And he feels terrible about that. And I think in her performance, particularly when they're rushing to help her and she says,
leave him alone,
I think there is a big part of her that goes, he was right to hit me.
Yeah, of course.
I deserve this.
100%.
And again, the Cine-Files is not saying people deserve to be hit. That is not the point. Right. What we're talking about is what is this character feeling at this moment in this film?
We're all human beings. And human beings at a certain moment react in certain ways, regardless of gender. And you understand that, when you live enough life, you understand that. And what you say about him being spent is 100% correct, because when the guys grab him, he doesn't try to rip away, go, get off me or anything. No, he's like, it's his soul that's been ripped out of his body. And he stares at her for a few seconds, and Sidney lets that linger, the staring at her, because you can see in Paul's face and his performance. Again, the nonverbal acting here is really incredible. All the pain, all the loss of her, all the betrayal, all the confusing emotions, as you mentioned earlier, all of them. But at the base foundation of them is love and the destruction of that love in the way he's staring at her. There's not anger on his face. It's hurt, it's pain, it's sadness, it's the tragedy of the loss of this relationship, and you can see it. He's finished with her.
Yep.
And that makes it all the more tragic. And we cut to them on the plane and, he's just sitting there. And again, if this is Frank from the beginning of the movie, he's got a bottle, he's drinking, and he's all like crying or despondent or depressed or suicidal, and Mickey has to warm him up. No, this is just a quiet scene with them on the plane. And you can see all the pain in Frank's face, and his body movement, even sitting lower in the seat, gives you an idea of the emotional state he's in as well.
Well, and again, we have this scene, just like when Laura came in and we had this scene where there are all these different levels between the plot level of the trial and the story level of all the characters. Same thing's happening here, which is that Mickey's like, we just won, you know, essentially, like this is a mistrial. Like the opposition did something completely illegal, like the jury tampering to spy on us. And Frank is just thinking about this person and going, in the end, he says,
I don't want a mistrial.
Yeah. Because he wants to win the case.
Yep.
And then we're back at the office. Frank is looking out the window, which is the image that's in posters and movies and, you know, and all this stuff. And the phone is ringing and Frank doesn't go to the phone. Mickey answers the phone. And now and again, it's why it's so interesting is now we can hear the person on the other end of the phone and hear that it's Laura.
He's not here now.
When are you expecting him?
I don't know when.
And hangs up. So in addition to just the emotional mindfuck of what's going on in the movie at this point, this is also the moment in the film where, according to all the reports that I heard, Paul Newman was almost killed.
What?
Here's what happened. They had a bunch of wood outside and it had rained the night before. And they had a bunch of 2x4s, and frequently the Grip and the Electric crew will use wood to build a rig in order to hang lights. And so they built a rig with the water-soaked 2x4s and hung some lights. And over the course, you've been on movie sets, over the course of the day, you run lights all day, it gets real hot.
Yes, it does.
And the wood had swollen when it was soaked with the water. And as it heated up, it shrunk. And about 400 pounds of lights fell from what they described inches from Paul Newman.
Wow.
Because this was, and apparently the key grip who had rigged all this stuff just went into a corner and cried because this was his fault. He could have killed one of the greatest movie stars in the world.
Wow.
Fortunately, everyone was fine. No one was injured, but it sounds like it was real scary.
Wow. Wow. Jesus. And from what I understand, Charlotte Rampling walked up to him and was like, is this over? Is it over? Are you going to get up? Are you going to fight? I think she said that to the grip.
Wow.
Woke him up and gotten his shit.
I just got what you were saying.
That's
Charlotte Rampling. You don't mess with her.
You don't mess with Charlotte Rampling. Get up and reset up the lights, you sack of shit. That's what.
No, the crazy thing is she's the one who put the wood out into the rain on purpose. That's what's crazy about the whole thing.
Oh, Charlotte, you dirty, dirty binks.
Yeah. We're back in court.
This shot, Steve, this shot is so amazing.
Describe what's amazing about it.
The way we're going from what we just saw, which is, of course, Mickey in the foreground having the conversation with Laura and rejecting her trying to talk to Frank. And then we fade, right? I mean, the editing here is important. Cuts, wipes, fades. Why are you using them? You're using them to evoke a certain emotion, right? We have Paul looking out despondently in the background as Mickey is talking to Laura. Frank, rather, is looking out despondently out the window as he smokes. And the next shot is him, level shot from the corner of the table. It is dark above his head. And there's only a little bit of light. And we're shot from a little bit of distance. And he looks all alone. Even Mickey is separated from him a little bit. He has his head or his nose in his fingers. And he's just in this place of like, what are you going to do? And even the bald dude from the diocese is right over his shoulder. So everything is in essence encircling Frank here, wondering what he's going to do. And I just think it's a great way to make the cut, to make us wonder what is going to happen. What is he going to do in this situation? You know?
And we are, again, cross-examining Dr. Towler.
Yeah.
And I think one of the interesting things is that you can hear the preparation that Dr. Towler had from Kincannon in the way he's answering the questions.
Yep.
Is that what happened to Deborah Ann Kay? She aspirated food particles into her mask.
She threw up in her mask.
Which is how Kincannon told him he should do this.
Right.
Which means in his mind, he's doing pretty well.
Let's talk about how Paul Newman is acting this section of the movie here. Because remember earlier when Frank is questioning Dr. Towler, he's much less confident. He's a little thinking on his feet. The judge interrupts to try to get a question answered. This is a different Frank. And the costuming, he's in a darker suit. This is a person who has found his strength. Even putting his hand in his pocket, shows a strength and a confidence. And then the timbre of his voice, it's much darker. It's much more gravelly. He has nothing left to lose. And sometimes when you have nothing left to lose, you find this weird confidence, this weird kind of belief in yourself, because you're just base at your most base level, and you can do things that you don't know that you can do. And just watching him confidently leading the doctor into this trap, as opposed to the Frank from like an hour ago or 30 minutes ago, I think is an incredible change. The way he's being shot from slightly below, we're seeing him now, as you mentioned earlier, Steve, in the hero shot. He is now our hero. He has been through all the trials and the betrayals and the loss and the successes. And now there's a confidence to him that wasn't there before, a matter-of-factness, a seriousness, right? And I love it.
I hadn't thought about it until you said it, but of course you're 100% right, which is it's the courage of having nothing left to lose.
Yeah.
And it's this weird thing because the movie has done this crazy magic trick of getting us to the bottom, the absolute nadir emotionally, while simultaneously we just figured out how to win the case.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I can't think of another movie that's like that, where it's both as bad as it could be and we're close to winning at the same time.
Yeah.
And he's brought up this idea of if she'd eaten an hour before, that could have caused this aspiration of food particles in her mask.
But she hadn't eaten 1 hour before admission.
If she had eaten an hour before being admitted to the hospital, then the inducement of a general anesthetic of the kind that you gave her would have been negligent?
Negligent? Yes, it would have been criminal, but such was not the case.
And that is key.
Yeah, because he's confident. He'll go, you know what? We should be in jail if we did this. And it's like,
and we excuse Dr. Fowler, and then as what we call a rebuttal witness, we call Caitlin Costello-Price to the stand.
The way he films this, where we're following the doctor from behind, it's almost like we're creeping on the doctor, because we are following him back to his seat, right? Like he almost gives us this real satisfying moment that we're following him going, go, you just wait. And then as soon as he says the name, the shock on his face turning to the right, and great job by him, just the reaction of utter shock. And literally when they say, I stopped in my tracks, he stops in his tracks. And we as the audience are supremely satisfied because we know this guy's lying. We know that he's being prepared by Kincannon. We know all the stuff they've done. And this is after the betrayal of Laura has been found out. We have this like momentary satisfaction that we finally cut the Russian, to use the Rocky references, which you've been using throughout this whole talk about the movie. We cut the Russian, and it's an incredible reaction,
I think, we discussed this way back in our first part about how much do each of these groups know? Does the bishop know? Does Kincannon know? Watching this again, and watching in particular the moment that you describe, I don't think Dr. Towler told anybody about him forcing Caitlin Costello to change that number.
I think those two doctors know, and clearly the other female nurse knows, but you're probably right. No one outside that mini circle knows. You're probably right.
Well, and even then, I mean, I think Nurse Rooney knows because that's Caitlin's best friend.
Exactly.
But I don't know that anyone else saw that admittance paper, and he immediately had her change the number,
Right.
Like, because there's a reaction of Kincannon clearly doesn't know what's going on.
Oh, he has no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
Yes. The reaction of Kincannon is really interesting, isn't it? Because he looks up at him because he knows the doctor's unsettled. But he is also a very smart lawyer who thinks on his feet. And he immediately sends out his two research assistants, who we've essentially seen, and I think he had one scene with, and sends them out immediately. So although he is knocked on his heels, he is still thinking quick in this situation, which I think is important. Because the last thing you want to do is undercut the strength of the enemy that you've set up in your movie by having them do stupid things. So the fact that he is still willing to fight this out, and we're going to find out a little bit later that he actually does win this motion to push this away. I think it's a really interesting thing to have us see it in close up, those assistants running out after Kincannon indicates that he needs to get research on this woman's name.
So what I think is interesting, though, is that the thing that makes Kincannon the best is preparation.
Yes.
It's always being ahead on every single thing. It's dotting every I and crossing every T.
Yeah.
In our first introduction to him, he's like, reread all the old depositions.
Yep.
Don't pretend that you remember them. Go over them. Go over every single detail. He doesn't like surprises. And now he is surprised.
Yeah.
And he is not, we are going to see this guy who has been impeccable throughout this entire movie suddenly not be so on the ball.
Yeah.
Whereas as contrasted with Frank, who has been riding the wave the whole time, he's always a bit behind the 8 ball or way behind the 8 ball trying to catch up. It's two totally different things.
Great point.
And Lindsay Krause enters the courtroom. She's sworn in. This is obviously very important because we're going to get into whether or not she's committing perjury.
Yeah.
And Frank Galvin begins asking questions, asks that she's the admitting nurse. She says that she signed the admissions form, that her initials are on the admissions form. And then he asks,
Did you ask the patient, when did she last eat?
Yes.
What did she say?
And there was a long, dramatic pause. And then she says,
She said she'd had a full meal 1 hour before coming to the hospital.
and there is that hard look between the doctor and Kincannon because suddenly there's a problem.
And again, I love the way this is directed because Paul Newman walks over to the doctor to stand behind the doctor.
Oh, that's true.
Right? And remember, this is important. Like, she didn't want to confront these doctors. She didn't want to deal with this. Like, and not because she's a coward. It's because of what they did to her and what it would bring up for her, the trauma of it all, right? We're speaking about that word a little more in our world nowadays. And so, of course, this is something that absolutely affected her. And it wasn't just like a trauma, like, I didn't get a chance to go get dinner that night because this happened. No, it was my entire life changed. My entire career trajectory changed because of what happened that night. So in a way, Frank walking behind the doctor is getting her to confront this thing and have them stare at each other. And he is stone-faced. And what's great about the face on him is this actor is I'm sorry, I can't remember the name right now, but like the look on his face is one of anger, betrayal, and yet a little afraid, right? And hers is stone. Lindsay is so great here. By the way, completely unrecognizable from the Lindsay Krause we see later with the blonde hair and the short cut there that she usually has. This is a different Lindsay Krause that I love. There's an innocence. She's more cherub-faced. So there's a feeling of like sympathy you have for her because you can tell that she's kind of a little bit of a babe in the woods in the way that she was used by these doctors. So it's really smart. Even the outfit they choose for her to wear is a more dowdy dress.
Yeah.
And so it's very much a woman of not great means. So you get sympathy that she's been pushed around by this rich, arrogant doctor who's a bit of an incompetent buffoon. And so having Paul walk behind him or Frank walk behind him, I think is a way of saying she's not afraid anymore and she's here to confront you. And then and it's also a way of messing with Kincannon by walking in his territory to kind of unsettle him, So it's brilliant direction here.
So I'm really glad you brought up that staging of him going to the doctor because, and I don't know this at all, but I think that is something that you discover in rehearsal.
Yeah, probably, brother. Yeah.
And this is the thing. I'll try to explain it really, really quickly. But like, there are directors who like to rehearse, and there are directors who don't like to rehearse, and there are great directors on both sides. I want to rehearse because I came out of the theater, and that's sort of my way of thinking about things. If you don't rehearse, here's how things tend to go on the set, which is the crew shows up, they get some of the lighting set up, they get maybe the camera sort of set up, but you don't rig everything. Yeah. And then you do what's called a blocking rehearsal, which is the actors haven't gone to makeup, they haven't gotten in their costumes yet, and they sort of walk through it. And the director probably has some staging that he's figured out in his head, sees what the actors do, the DP sees what they do, then the actors go away and we light the scene and we set everything up so they can come back and then we shoot it. That means that you are spending a lot of money for every moment of rehearsal because your crew is there, your equipment is there, you're on the location, you've got everything set up, and this is really, really expensive. Yeah. What you don't have time to do is explore. So you don't have time to try stuff out because you got to get the actors to get into hair and makeup so then get out of hair and makeup so you can start shooting. Yeah. When you have a rehearsal, then you have some time to go, you know what would happen if I do this?
Yeah.
And then that leads the director to go, well, if you did this, then I would probably do this with this other actor. Oh, well, if we did this, then maybe we put the camera here. And then you explore it and you try it and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. And if it doesn't work, you do something else.
Yeah.
And so like there's all this time because you're not on the set, on the location with the entire crew.
Yep.
You don't have that kind of pressure. And there's so many little details in this movie that to me can only come out of a rehearsal process.
Yeah, it's written by Mamet, who of course will go on to write a bunch of plays.
Who's a theater guy.
He's a theater guy. And it's even shot by Sidney Lumet, who of course started out with 12 Angry Men, which was essentially a theater play transferred over into. So this is something that both of the people involved in this, and of course the production crew as well, understand. And Newman being a fan of rehearsals, right? So you see what you discover here when you do these kinds of things and you go into it. That's an actor's actor. And this may be why I love the film as well. It's a nice combination of a play and a film that works in how it's staged and directed and performed.
And did you put the numeral 1 on this admission sheet? I mean, standing for 1 hour.
I did.
A single hour.
Yes.
And then this is the difference between what makes a good movie and reality.
Yeah.
In reality, Frank Galvin would ask the next questions. Why is the number different? And he would do that,
right?
Not depend upon Kincannon stumbling into the answer he wants the jury to hear.
Right.
That is foolish for a lawyer.
Yeah.
However, it is absolutely right for the dramatic choice in this movie. So now the Prince of Darkness is about to get up and cross-examine Caitlin Price.
The way this whole thing starts, again, the staging of this is really important. I cannot stress this enough. For those of you who watch these movies, there are things that are happening on subconscious levels that are incredible and make certain films stand out from other films. And it is because when you cast really great actors, especially those with a lot of theater experience, they can bring these little movements to bear in a performance, and you notice them if you're an actor, but you really appreciate them if you're just a film lover. You don't even have to be an actor. The way he starts the whole thing, he shoves his chair aside. That's not something that Kincannon would normally do. Stands up. He walks not around the doctor. He walks behind his people, staring at Frank the whole time, as if to be like saying to him, okay, all right, you mess with me, you come in my territory, let's go. And the way he walks up to her, and it's, again, brilliant placement of the camera by Lumet. It is just over her shoulder. He comes in as this immense presence into the screen. And the way he's like this disapproving grandfather that you never want to have in your life. But the way he walks up, even though he's holding his hands, it's just this kind of air of it's regressing you back to childhood and having an adult basically call you out for a mistake that you've made.
You're aware of the penalties for perjury?
It's a crime.
It is a crime, a serious crime.
I wouldn't do it.
You would not?
No.
And she's very strong, but scared too.
Of course.
You know?
She's intimidated. Yeah, why not?
4 years ago, when you were working as a nurse, are you aware that these doctors, Marks and Towler, based their treatment of Deborah Ann Kay on this admitting form, which you signed?
And then Lindsay does an incredible thing with the back and forth. As he becomes more belligerent and cutting her off, whatever, her head goes back more and more as she looks at him, again, kind of simulating a bit of a child there, being intimidated by an adult. So you can see how the doctor might have done this to her to make her change it from a 1 to a 9. And you can see how James Mason as Kincannon, in our headcanon, would have intimidated Laura into being this person who's supposed to monitor Frank and seduce Frank. Maybe not even, as you said, Steve, it's still up in the air whether she was supposed to have sex with him, but certainly get close to him, get his trust, and get the information. You can see that he probably used this tactic with her the first time she resisted the idea of doing it. So there's so much in this that you can take away from Kincannon. Because, by the way, we don't get a lot of time with Mason, but he makes the most of it. And this is my favorite scene with him because of how he's thinking on his feet and trying to get her to admit that she was wrong, even though she's not. You know, it's a fascinating back and forth.
Then he interrupts her the way that Galvin was interrupting Towler before and doesn't let her answer.
Wasn't that an oath? These are your initials, KC. When you signed this form, you took an oath no less important than that which you've taken today. Isn't that right? Isn't that right?
Yes.
He is walking down a perfectly logical, well-reasoned argument to frame a person that is committing perjury.
That he thinks is committing perjury, right?
Exactly.
Or to make it look like she's committing perjury to the
Right.
to the jury. Because my guess is that Kincannon knows by the doctor's reaction that what she is telling is probably the truth. But his job is to defend this guy to the best of his ability in order to earn his fee and what have you, and keep his reputation.
And here's the thing about this, is that we saw Frank Galvin make the classic blunder, which is not getting involved in a land war in Asia, but is asking a question that he doesn't already know the answer to.
Yes.
And everything Kincannon is doing right now would be great if he understood what had happened, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
And so he is pushing her in exactly the wrong direction.
Right.
Because he has brought up that there are these two oaths. There's the oath that was what she just gave, not to perjure herself, and then the oath that she swore to when she took the admittance form 4 years ago.
You sworn today that the patient ate 1 hour before admittance. 4 years ago, you swore that she ate 9 hours before admittance. All right, which is the lie?
And again, he doesn't let her answer. It's the same as what Frank Galvin was doing with Towler.
You know that these men could have settled out of court. They wanted a trial. They wanted to clear their names.
Which we know is a lie.
Yeah.
They didn't want that.
And you would come here and on a slip of memory 4 years ago, you'd ruin their lives.
They lied.
They lied? They lied? When did they lie?
They lied? Such a great comeback from
Well, and he's doing if he knew the truth, he wouldn't do this tactic. But this tactic is to intimidate and mock her and belittle her the way he belittled Dr. Thompson. That is a technique that's probably worked 1,000 times for him before.
Yes.
Do you know what a lie is?
I do, yes.
You swore on this form that the patient ate 9 hours.
That's not what I wrote.
You just told me that you signed it.
I signed it, yes.
It's funny. That's one of the few bits of actually sounding like Mamet dialogue.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
You know,
yes.
with the repetitions of yes, 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 I signed it, yes.
But I didn't write a 9. I wrote a 1.
And I think Kincannon is completely thrown at this moment.
You didn't write a 9, you wrote a 1. I've been repeating that line in my head since I was 12 years old, okay? I just want to make that really clear. James Mason has lived in my brain for 4 decades now, 4+ decades from that line. Just the way he delivers that line. There are certain lines you hear in movies and they stay with you forever. And the way he just delivers that line and pauses there as a way of trying to get the jury to dismiss her by saying it that way, with such derisiveness in his tone, it's just fantastic, And so that we're like, oh no, right? Until she says what she's going to say here in a few seconds. It's fantastic.
You know, it just occurred to me as you were speaking.
That I should do the whole thing of James Mason? No, I'm joking.
I am certain that you could. That I've known this whole time.
No.
What occurred to me is that we start with this character that is all flaws and all cracks.
Yes.
And who slowly comes together despite all of these adversities and surprises and curveballs the world throws him to finally come together and win this case.
Yeah.
And we start with his antagonist, who is no flaws and no cracks.
Yeah.
He has got his whole world exactly. Every duck is in a row. Everything is where he wanted, down to the silver tea set the butler uses to serve him his tea when he's doing his meetings in his conference room.
Yes.
And now the one curveball comes and he is completely thrown.
Yeah.
He doesn't know how to deal.
Right. Because sometimes if you control so much, you can't handle the world when it goes out of control. And so you've got to have a healthy mix of both, for God's sake.
And then he makes the mistake again of asking a question he doesn't know the answer to.
And how is it that you remember so clearly after 4 years?
Because I kept a copy.
And this is as good. His reaction is as good as the doctor. The color that drips out of his face. I mean, it drains out of his face so quickly before he immediately goes to the judge. But if you pause that moment when she says, because I kept a copy, just the little mini hesitation and the color draining from his face, again, fantastic performance from James Mason here.
I have it right here.
Objection. You can't be expected to accept a photocopy when the court already has the original.
And the judge, who has been fully in his pocket this whole time, says,
I'll rule on that presently. Please proceed.
And do you catch James Mason's face? He now becomes a befuddled old man.
Yep.
Like, here was this majestic Prince of Darkness. And the judge, the man he had, the reason he can be the Prince of Darkness, yes, his preparation, but it's also because all these judges and everyone else is intimidated by him. Now, the first time he gets caught with his pants down, and he does get caught with his pants down, and the judge doesn't back him up, all of a sudden he looks like he looks his age. He looks this befuddled old man who doesn't know what to do, and he's stumbling over his words and hesitating, and I think it's fantastic. Right? Again, this is the Russian. This is the Russian, you know, not because I want an old man to look this way. It's more a matter of like, he's been presented as this kind of huge villain to defeat in the movie. And now you've got him on the ropes, and it's kind of satisfying, to be honest with you.
I totally agree. And it's funny. There's that line that it's kind of a throwaway that Mickey says about, you know, Frankie thought that anyone who knew what a spinnaker was had to be like a hero or know everything or something like that. I don't know what the line is exactly.
Yes.
Is that I think it's not that Kincannon isn't brilliant and hardworking and has achieved incredible things. That's true.
Yeah.
But people find it very difficult to separate their success from their privilege and their elitism and their status and their advantages.
Yeah.
And Kincannon has over-exaggerated his ability and in his mind. He thinks he's untouchable, and he's not.
Yeah.
What in the world induced you to make a photocopy of an obscure record and hold it for 4 years? Your Honor, this...
And there's just no help from the judge at all. It's very clear he's not going to do anything. And then he's just sputtering.
Yes.
Why? Why would you do that?
I thought I might need it.
And why would you think that?
And he should not ask any more questions.
Yeah, really should. Yeah,
he should say, Your Honor, I request a short recess. Like, you just get the fuck. I feel sick. Make some excuse. Tell one of his lawyers to faint or something. Just some excuse to stop this right now. But he doesn't. And man, Lindsay Krause, I mean, there's just so many performances in this movie where someone comes in and just knocks it out of the park. Yeah. And I'm not going to say which one is the best, but Lindsay Krause is in the list of one of the best ones.
I mean, talk about making the most of your screen time. She is heartbreaking here, Steve.
After the operation, when that poor girl, she went into a coma, Dr. Towler called me in. He told me that he'd had 5 difficult deliveries in a row, and he was tired. And he never looked at the admittance form.
And there's a reaction from the sister, which I think is such a critical shot, because it is the first moment where she has hope.
Yes.
And it's combined with there really was the knowledge that her sister, of what really happened to her sister.
The vindication.
Exactly. Yeah.
He told me to change the 1 to a 9. Or else he said he'd fire me. He said I'd never work again.
And then it's hard not to get emotional myself.
Of course.
Just hearing her lines in my head and having to read them. She says,
"Who were these men? Who were these men? I wanted to be a nurse."
Bro, there has never been a time I've watched this movie, even right now talking about it, like you said.
Yeah,
I get so emotional, and I cry every time because, the performance of Lindsay Krause. And listen, Lumet keeps the camera on her for 99% of this monologue. The rest, there's a quick shot to the doctor, as you said, a quick shot to her sister, but Lindsay carries this monologue. The pause she takes, the extended pause she takes, looking at the doctor. And if you watch this scene again, guys, she stares at him the whole time she's answering the question. She's not afraid. This has been a reckoning that has been coming. Yes, she's emotional. Yes, she's in pain. Yes, she's hurt. Yes, she's remembering the trauma of that day. But she is making him pay. She is finally confronting it. There's such a catharsis here for us, just sampling the pain she must have been going through for years, hiding this, and you can tell that she cared about this woman in the way she speaks about her. This poor woman, she's clearly emotionally affected by it. And she's probably felt guilt for years about it because she had to cover it up. Not just them running her out of the business, but also the fact that this woman went into a coma and has stayed in a coma for the rest of it. She'll probably carry this forever. Even after she leaves the courtroom, I think this woman will carry the guilt of what happened to that woman with her for the rest of her life, irregardless of this cathartic moment. But Lindsay delivers it so perfectly so that when she gets to who were these men? And by the way, another reason why this is one of my mother's favorite movies is my mother was a nurse,
right,
for many years. And so for her, she understands what doctors can do and how they can intimidate you and what have you. So there's a real pain. And so hearing my mother's stories growing up, when I see this scene, I so connect with Lindsay that it as I said, it never fails to elicit a super powerful emotions from me. And then her putting her head in, covering her eyes and breaking down on the stand. It's so authentic. It's so beautiful. It's so fantastic. It's just a great performance in such a small amount of time.
Well, and I love great dialogue. I love writers who can write a great speech, and pick your favorite, whether it's Aaron Sorkin or Quentin Tarantino or whatever writer, Patty Chayefsky, as we talked about in Network, someone who can write eloquent and beautiful dialogue, and that's amazing, and I admire that.
Yeah.
This is 3 sentences.
Yeah.
One of them repeated. Who were these men?
Yeah.
Who were these men? I wanted to be a nurse. And I think contained in those 3 sentences, it's not just the terrible guilt she feels about the loss of this woman's life.
Yeah.
It's not just that. This was her whole future.
Yes.
I wanted to be a nurse. This was the whole life she had planned for herself and worked for herself. Her entire identity was taken away by these people. And all of that is encapsulated in 3 sentences.
2 lives were taken that day.
Yeah.
The young woman's and hers. Yeah.
Yep.
Excellent points.
So Sidney Lumet, again, this is why he's going to always be my guy, as like someone to emulate. So when you're directing, you always got to think about efficiency, and you never want to have more people on the set than you need because they cost money. People cost money. And so in general, if you can release people, you would release them. So if you've got a scene where you're going to be in close up to do a dramatic scene, and you've got a whole bunch of extras, who, by the way, Sidney Lumet calls them all actors, which is something I thought you would like. He doesn't call them extras. So you've got the people in the jury box, and you've got the crowd behind the lawyers in the audience. Is that normally what you would do is you would shoot all their stuff and then let them go, and then you could just focus on James Mason and Lindsay Krause and work on that stuff. Right. He didn't do that. He had the entire crew and everyone in the scene there to watch Lindsay Krause and James Mason do the whole scene. And then he turned around to get reactions because he went, how are they going to be able to react to this if they haven't seen it?
Wow.
So they were there all day watching them do this. And he said that he saw something he had never seen before when Lindsay Krause finished this speech, that all of them burst into applause.
Wow.
And what he said was interesting, because this makes sense to me, is that he's seen crews burst into applause when an actor does something great, but very rarely do the actors burst into applause or extras burst into applause, but they all did.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing.
So Kincannon clearly shaken, says no further questions. And our very smarmy lawyer from Kincannon's office is running with a book, and we come up with the objection, which is
the admission of a duplicate document in preference to an existing original must presuppose the possibility of alteration, and so must be disallowed.
And the judge is sort of looking through his legal stuff and goes,
Yes, the document is disallowed.
Objection.
Overruled.
Exception.
Noted.
And by the way, legally, this is true. Like, there is reasons of why you can't accept a Xerox if you already have the original. That is part of the law. Yeah. And then Kincannon goes on, and he's kind of gotten his footing again a little bit. And he says,
Furthermore, Miss Costello is a rebuttal witness. As the court knows, no prior notice was given of Miss Costello's appearance. And as a surprise witness, she may serve only to rebut direct testimony.
So basically, they're saying all that she was there was to rebut testimony. She can't be brought in to bring in new evidence, which is what she's done.
Yeah.
And so they object to that.
Yes, I'm going to oppose that.
Objection.
Overruled.
Exception.
Noted.
We're getting jerked around so much by this movie because we're just like had this cathartic, emotional moment where the truth has finally come out, and immediately the lid is slapped down on it, and we're not going to get to use any of that information.
Which is so brilliant, again, with the writing. What happens here, and I think this is really important to point out, is Kincannon provides cover for the judge to rule in his favor by citing this statute. A judge does not have to adhere to a statute ever. They can just create new law, right? And say like, no, I'm going to ignore in this case because of this particular thing. Now, does it mean it could be open for appeal? 100%, but they could do it. But he provides cover. And look, he's stumped. Clearly the judge himself is probably shocked by all this. Because remember, the judge actually, and this is kind of a weird way to reframe the judge now, because he doesn't try to actively stop this woman from testifying. He doesn't force her to stay on the stand. He doesn't berate her, much like he was doing with the doctor, right? Dr. Thompson. He lets her speak. And he himself now realizes, like, okay, there's something really shitty going on here. So he might have really believed that the diocese was right and that these doctors were right and that Frank is an ambulance chaser and this is a bullshit case and he's roped this poor couple into this situation from the beginning. But I think Lindsay Krause's performance, I think the nurse's performance there changes him completely. And the fact that you see both the judge and Kincannon, who had been these powerful figures and antagonists in the movie, all of a sudden a bit stumbling around, a bit pushed back on their heels, a bit like not sure what's going on and trying to kind of, find cover in this situation speaks volumes. And then to have this idea of the going back to the jury, and say, it's good for us as an audience to go like, oh, like there's an element of we have to be still not sure where the verdict is going to go. Because this, if we kept it this way, that you could keep the testimony, keep the document, all of that, it kind of makes the ending anticlimactic. By having this moment where the judge says, no, you can't take this into consideration and you have to ignore her testimony. Now we're back, as you said, we're being jerked around. And it's on purpose so that we can stay in a state of like, what's going to happen to the end of the movie? And I also think this back and forth with him and Frank Galvin, by the end of his final exception, the judge is now sympathetic towards Frank, which is a color we have not seen on the judge until this exact moment on the third exception, because he knows that Frank is right. And he appreciates that Frank is saying these things because now I think he's starting to grasp that Frank is a damn good lawyer and he maybe was railroaded in the back of his mind. So I think so much is accomplished once Lindsay walks through the door that changes everything that we've seen from these characters up until this point.
Well, and isn't it amazing that we could have a character like the judge?
Yeah.
Because I like Kincannon, despite him being the Prince of Darkness. I had fun in his scenes. He is a fun character.
Absolutely.
The judge I don't like at all.
Right.
Ever. And yet in this scene, I go, oh, he's a human too.
Yes. Yes.
Like,
it's a great twist.
But then in just a crushing bit of jury instruction, he turns to the jury and says,
The jury will be advised not to consider the testimony of Miss Costello. Her entire testimony must be stricken from the record. You shouldn't have heard it, but you did. That was my mistake. You must strike it from your minds. Give it no weight.
And in this moment, you see the doctor, Towler, reach out and touch Kincannon's arm. It's just another of these little details.
And then Kincannon moves forward on the desk to, in essence, move his hand off of him. Yep. Because he knows now that the doctor is guilty, and he knows now that the doctor hid something from him, knowing that Kincannon is lauded for his preparation. So he's now affected Kincannon's reputation by this move. So Kincannon wants nothing to do with this guy. Look, I think he looked down on this guy already from the way he treated him in his office. Now he sees him as even less than human by pulling this situation. He cares even less, which is so great. And I love that Lumet left this scene in there to have Mason move forward, Kincannon, and essentially shove off the doctor's hand off his, and his reaction, the doctor's reaction to, he knows he's been essentially dismissed by this man. It's fantastic.
I want to highlight, I think this is what you're saying, but I want to go back and highlight it even further, which is that there kind of are two possibilities. One possibility is that he realizes that his client is responsible for the death of this woman, or for the, her paralysis or whatever, her brain damage, and so therefore he is disgusted by this person's lies. There is another possibility where he just is like, you should have told me, you made me look bad in front of the court and damage my reputation.
Yeah.
Is that I don't care what terrible thing you did. You screwed me up as a lawyer, and I think it's very much the latter.
Yeah, maybe. I just think at the end of the day, he just sees him as lesser than for hiding this from him. But maybe it's the other, maybe it's the latter. But I kind of look at it as a mixture of both. But yeah.
We're just briefly checking in with the bishop, who's getting a report on the case, hearing that Kincannon was brilliant. And he says,
Tell me about Caitlin Costello.
There's nothing to tell. It's been stricken from the record.
I know, but did you believe her?
The reaction of the guy is great. The double take shock reactions. He's lifting the cup to his mouth, and the bishop says something to him that he did not anticipate, which is, did you believe her? And he gets caught unaware. Like, he gets caught by that. And he's almost like, he's almost like he doesn't know what to say, because he knows he believed her. But he doesn't, he's been so on the side of the archdiocese in all of this that it unsettles him a little bit. And that reaction is why we stay on the bishop when we go back to him, because he is now knowing, yeah, she told the truth. If this guy, who is probably my biggest attack dog, can hesitate in answering that question and look a bit shocked or unsettled by it, that's the only answer I need. And I know she was telling the truth, which is why we stay with him. And then he turns and looks down on the ground as if to be like, damn it, this did happen. They did do it. They did mess this up, And so, and as I don't know, maybe he's still a good man underneath, because as you said, you probably think he doesn't know about what the doctors did. But in that looking at the ground, I think he's saying like, yeah, I messed this one up. I feel bad about this one.
I mean, I'm not going to make any political statements at all, but I will say we are in the midst of a very contentious election.
Yeah.
And more of our time is spent thinking about how to win than it is thinking about what is the truth. And that's for everybody, including me, So we're back to court. And I would like to point out that sitting in the gallery directly behind the sister and her husband is Bruce Willis.
A young Bruce Willis with hair.
With lots of hair.
My God. Incredible. Look at it. I'm looking at it right now as we're talking about it. Look at that hair.
It's just it's so funny because he is so being, an extra, He's
or as
just
Sidney Lumet would say, an actor.
An actor.
Yeah.
I knew you were going to call me on that.
No, I wasn't calling you. I was just saying like I didn't know he did that. So that's a great thing that he says extras are actors, because I was an extra. I know what it's like. You want to be respected and considered an actor. So yeah.
So it's time for closing statements.
Can I throw in one more piece of this?
Yeah.
You know who else is in the courtroom?
No.
Tobin Bell, who would eventually become Jigsaw in the Saw franchise. Tobin Bell is in the courtroom as well, just to the left of, a little bit past the left of Bruce Willis.
Fascinating. Yeah. So it is time for closing statements. And we call on Frank, who stands up. He crumples a piece of paper in his hand, and he goes to speak to the jury. Now, Mamet was really struggling with this speech.
Oh, I bet.
He just couldn't get there. Couldn't figure out how to get there.
Yeah.
And he's married, as we said, to Lindsay Krause. And he's just talking to her and just goes like, well, what can be said? What can be said at this point? And apparently they stayed up most of the night talking about this scene. Wow. And I can't help paralleling this with the scene with Laura where she kicks Frank in the ass. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know that there's a connection, but I do feel like there's a parallel between the writer who feels not up to the task of summing up this movie at this moment and the lawyer who feels not up to the task of summing up this case.
Yeah.
You know? And what Lindsay Krause's advice to him was just have him talk.
It's such an unusual closing statement.
You know, so much of the time we're just lost. We say, please, God, tell us what is right. Tell us what is true.
Right there, that sums up so much of Frank Galvin's journey.
Yeah.
Including Laura. What is right? What is true?
You know what struck me as we were talking about this, and this has never struck me before in our conversations, one of the reasons I enjoy doing this show, because I never know what's going to come up for me, even with a movie I've seen 5 million times like this one.
Right.
But Kincannon represents the establishment that tried to railroad Frank.
Totally.
Kincannon represents Frank's former father-in-law. And I had never put that together until we were just talking right now about these back and forths. And so what you see from Frank here is everything's been stripped away now. And I'm just a vulnerable, open person. And I'm going to tell you what I feel about this whole situation. And that's what makes it believable. I don't know if he even wrote this speech. I think he's just going off the cuff, and that's how he plays
I definitely think it's off the cuff.
Yeah, off the cuff, speaking honestly, trying to connect to human beings and to connect to their humanity, right? Because in a way, her case represents another railroading. And so he's speaking for two people in this moment, for himself and for that woman. Yes, predominantly for that woman, but for himself, his client, but for himself as well. And I think that's what's fantastic. And Sidney Lumet, again, keeping the camera far away, so we have the scope of the courtroom there with Bruce Willis and Tobin Bell and Paul Newman, and then slowly moving in on him as he becomes more powerful in connecting with the jury and more human in appealing to them. And I think that's a fantastic decision direction-wise. And as an actor, watching another actor, it's just, these are the kind of directors you hope that you get into the hands of so they can make you shine as an actor because you're going to do your work, you know?
It's so funny. It's just the difference between the adversarial relation that some directors have with actors, like we've heard about with Kubrick or other ones, and the supportive relationship. Yeah. And this is like Lumet wants you to shine. That's the whole point.
Right.
And I think too there is an alchemy and a similarity between what the lawyer has to do, because the lawyer has to connect emotionally to the material in order to get the jury to connect emotionally.
Right.
And the writer has to connect emotionally to the lawyer, and the actor has to connect emotionally to the lawyer in order to have the audience emotionally connected to the story.
Right.
You know?
Great point, man.
We become tired of hearing people lie. And after a time, we become dead. A little dead. We think of ourselves as victims. And we become victims.
Again, that's everything we've been talking about in the whole film.
Yep.
It's Laura, it's Kincannon, it's the power of the bishop, it's the Prince of Darkness who can bring all this power to bear against you, it's everything conspiring against justice, it's the poor husband and wife who just want to leave town and have their sister taken care of and can't get a break, it's the nurses, it's everyone.
We doubt ourselves, we doubt our beliefs, we doubt our institutions, and we doubt the law. But today, you are the law.
I think that expresses something about what it is to be in a jury, what it is to be in a democracy, what it is to be in a community.
Yeah.
Today, you are the law.
Not some book, not the lawyers, not a marble statue, or the trappings of the court. See, those are just symbols of our desire to be just.
I also love the framing of this movie. Honestly, despite all of the underhandedness and nastiness in it, the framing of the movie is that people are essentially good when left to their devices.
To quote a great doctor, people might surprise you. They're capable of more good than you think, right? Isn't that what Dr. Thompson tells him?
Yep.
And it's exactly what happens by the end of the movie.
They are in fact a prayer. I mean, a fervent and a frightened prayer. In my religion, they say, act as if you had faith.
faith will be given to you. If we are to have faith in justice, we need only to believe in ourselves and act with justice. See, I believe there is justice in our hearts.
It moves me too. Because that's what I've always believed. You know, I've always believed that humans have justice in their hearts. And I've been hurt living by that belief. You know?
Well, there's no way to not get hurt in this world, because I've been as cynical as they come and I've still gotten hurt.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's the way the world is, unfortunately. And that's just, and how you rise above it, how you overcome it is how you can live a better life, you know, a more satisfying life. You know, that this is going to be part of life, is that people will disappoint you. People will use you. People will betray you. People in positions of power will step on people of lower economic status in order to save their status and lie to themselves that they're doing it for the greater good because they help more people. Right. And this happens all the time. I can't remember right now. Something happened recently and someone said, well, look at all the good they've done as a counter to the one thing they've done. And I was like, none of that matters. Mafia people do the same thing. Oh, look how much they've helped the community. And it's like, but look at all the terrible things they're doing. It doesn't, you know, you have to be a good all the time, or at least strive to be good. You can make mistakes, but if you intentionally make mistakes or don't take responsibility, then that's a bad lesson to send to people who are coming up behind you.
I mean, I think what you hit the nail on the head with striving to be good. I mean, this is a movie with all flawed people.
Yes.
All complicated people. And we started with a character, Frank Galvin, who was not striving to be good. He was not a good person at the beginning of this movie. And he was an unhappy person. He was a wrecked person by his choices. And despite all of the compromises and all of the mistakes, he is striving to be good. Yeah. And he has become someone who is trying to act with faith even when he doesn't have it.
Yep.
And hoping that faith will be given to him.
Yep.
And I think at the end of this speech, we're all the jury. We're all feeling like the jury. And
I mean, this is in essence final thoughts. This closing speech or this closing argument from Frank, because we never hear Kincannon's closing argument.
Right.
This is essentially the movie speaking to us. Frank's speech is not only for the jury, it's David Mamet and Sidney Lumet and Paul Newman probably speaking to us. You know, and remember, this is 1982. We're just out of the 70s. That was one of the most divisive decades in our country's history, with Vietnam and the after effect of civil rights and assassinations and all this stuff that happened through the late 60s into the 70s that was going on in our world. And this film, in essence, is trying to tell us that we can be good and we should do good. And think about the fact that Wall Street is like 5 years later from this film, you know. And so it is this kind of attempt to get people to understand how good they can be, and that people are essentially good, you know. So I think the film is speaking to us, to ask us to look at our better angels of our nature. You know?
So I want you to hold on to the idea that this is the final thoughts of the film from Mamet and Lumet for a second, but then I want to tell you something else first.
Okay.
So they did a couple of takes. This is basically all in one take.
Yeah.
Paul was absolutely brilliant. And there is a term that many people who see film stuff have probably heard, and maybe they don't know what the meaning is, which is this phrase that you hear at the end of a take, which is check the gate.
Yeah.
What check the gate means is that you have these reels of film, and they're going to go through the camera, and film is very frail. And the most dangerous place is when the film goes right up in front of the lens where the photograph gets taken. Yeah. And what you're checking for is if there is a piece of dust or a hair or something like that, because it can scratch the film. They didn't see anything. They say print it. They wrap for the day. They get their dailies the next day. And in this brilliant take of Paul Newman's, there is a long scratch through the whole thing. It is completely ruined. So they had to go back the next day and shoot the whole thing again.
And they had to call in probably
all the extras, all the actors.
Right. I wonder if this is how Bruce Willis got selected and Tobin Bell. Like, they weren't there for the first time, but they
I don't
were
know.
selected for the second time, maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. It depends on whether or not they had coverage they wanted to use. If they're using coverage, you have to have everything exactly the same.
Good point.
They come back. What Lumet says is usually whenever you have to do this, it's never going to be as good. Everyone's going to be disappointed. Everyone's going to be out of sorts because they thought they had it and they were done.
Right.
They came back to do it again. He said this time was better.
Amazing.
So Paul Newman goes back and sits down at the desk. I love the little detail. It's exactly the opposite of what we saw with Towler and Kincannon. Mickey puts his hand on Paul Newman's arm.
Yes, right. I'm glad you caught that. Yes, absolutely. The contradiction. And it's received well from Paul. And I love the fact that he just slumps into the chair, brother. It's just such a great thing because that's it. He's done. He said what he needed to say. He has finished the journey, you know.
Well, speaking of finish the journey, as you said, we would put a pin in this idea that this was Mamet speaking to us and summing up the film. Well, do you remember way back when we started this whole conversation that there was a conflict between Mamet and Zanuck and Brown, and Mamet walked off the picture?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I will now tell you why that happened.
Oh, my God.
Because this, in fact, was the end of Mamet's script.
Oh.
This was the end. There was no verdict given.
Oh, shit.
He had him do the speech. And then he wrote, you turn the page, and it said the end. And he goes in to have a meeting with Zanuck and Brown, and David Zanuck goes, I think there's a page missing in this script. And Mamet did not find that funny. And then he went, and then Zanuck, you know, when someone makes a joke and it doesn't go over, so they double down on the joke?
Yeah.
Then Zanuck said, I've got an idea. For the poster, we just put up the verdict ? We put up a question mark on the poster. Mamet definitely didn't think that was funny. Wow. He walked out of their office, giving them the finger on the way out, and walked off the picture.
That's Mamet for you.
Yep.
Even as a young up-and-coming writer.
And then we went off to make a whole bunch of different versions of the script, and Robert Redford comes in, different directors are coming in and out, and finally Lumet comes back in, reads the original script, and goes, that's it. We just have to add the ending. And they did bring Mamet back in and finally convince him to actually give us a verdict.
Cooler heads prevailed. Probably Lindsay was like, get your ass back in there.
Get your ass back. I can't abide with failure. Not again.
I can't abide failure, David. I wonder.
Well, that's why that was the immediate connection I made. I'm not saying that there is one, but that is what I kept feeling hearing these stories.
Yeah, David came back. Just they wanted to rewrite the script, and then Lindsay's like, I can't abide failure, man. You write this damn thing. Oh, that would have been fantastic.
So the bailiff comes in, followed by the jury. It's very clear that Frank and Mickey both know that they've lost. You know, that they're about to hear a terrible verdict.
Right, they think that, yes, yeah.
Have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. Your Honor, we've agreed to hold for the plaintiff, Deborah Ann Kay, and against St. Catherine Labouré, Doctors Towler and Marks.
And that camera move coming down onto Frank and Mickey is so good.
Yeah. I don't normally like those tricks, but it works here, man. It works here so well.
This is where it's supposed to be.
Yep.
And there's the reaction from the sister and her husband, and there's the incredible reaction from Jack Warden. And then this next line.
But, Your Honor, are we limited on the size of the award? What I mean, sir, are we permitted to award an amount greater than the amount the plaintiff asked for?
Just the reaction to this is just, oh my God, this is amazing.
Listen, the reaction from everybody, right?
Yeah.
Kincannon's assistant, the guy's been doing all the research, he's like, oh my God, like these bastards. Like he's mad because it's going to cost the diocese a lot of money, which may affect the employment there. But this guy also, isn't this the guy who skipped his vacation?
Yep.
So he skipped his whole vacation just to lose the case. So he's got that reaction. And then Mickey is just like looking at the sky like, oh my God, thank you, God. Like he won a ball game or something, you know? So it's fantastic.
Well, it's such a thing. I think about Mamet not wanting to have an ending. And yes, there, it's like there were versions of Romeo and Juliet where they lived that were done in like the 1800s because people are like, let's give them a happy end. People don't want a sad ending. And there are times where it's like, no, sometimes you need the sad ending. Sometimes you need the ambiguous ending. That's what makes it good.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's give the fucking people what they want. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Like this is the right ending. This is what we wanted.
And you can tell the judge is like a little bit perturbed by that, but he also has to respect the jury. And says, no, you're not limited, that you can see whatever. If you pause the film at this moment with Paul Newman in the close-up and the finger, and he's looking down, just like kind of happy at the result, but also overwhelmed by how this all turned out. Look behind his right shoulder. Two things are happening. One, the bald dude from the diocese is super pissed and looking at the judge. And then right behind him, ever the consummate actor, Bruce Willis, is smiling and laughing at this verdict out of disbelief that it's happening. So I thought that was a fantastic thing to see Bruce Willis being in the scene himself and being surprised as if he's been sitting in the courtroom the whole time for this trial. You know, it's fantastic.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Yeah, exactly. Pay up, motherfucker. Yeah.
So we excuse the jury to go, and we never hear what the amount was. None of that matters.
Which
It's
is
not
great.
important. Yeah, we're exiting the courtroom. Everyone is congratulating Frank, and then across the way, he sees Laura.
Oh, God.
And they look at each other, and then Frank gets distracted for a moment and looks back, and she's gone.
Steve Morris, I have to ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
Paul Newman, Frank, she's gone. Frank stops a second time to look back for her. Steve Morris.
Yes.
What was going to happen if she had still been standing there?
I don't know the answer, but I do know.
You don't know the answer? What was going to happen, Mr. Morris?
I don't want to perjure myself, Your Honor, but so here's what I know.
Yeah,
I am firmly convinced that whatever Kincannon's instructions to Laura were at the beginning, she fell in love with Frank Galvin.
100% she did. 100%.
Despite the betrayal and everything else that happened.
Yes.
And I am 100% convinced that no matter how deeply betrayed Frank Galvin feels by Laura, part of him is absolutely still in love with her.
Yes. So let me tell you what I think about this movie.
Yes, please.
The reason this film works is because it feels so real.
Yeah.
Because humans are messy. And Rocky is Rocky. The verdict is the verdict. Those are two different things. Now, don't get me wrong. Rocky is a bit messy. Paulie's a bit messy. Obviously,
Paulie's very messy.
Yeah, Paulie's very messy. But he looks back because Frank, although this has been a cathartic moment and he's changed to a degree, he's still Frank. So every once in a while, he still might put his fingers over the fire. He still might risk getting burnt. So I like the fact that it isn't like, oh, I've made a wholesale change in my life. I like that he stops and looks back because guess what? Human beings would, especially a human being who has played with fire for the last few years since the whole situation went down with him and his ex-wife. So the fact that he looks for her, I agree with you. He's still in love with her, but it's also that little slight bit of self-destruction that is still inside Frank.
Oh, sure.
That would kind of look for her still to see if he could maybe play with this fire and come out unburnt. And I like that about it. It's human, you know?
It's odd to me that we spent so much time going back to Rocky, but I think it keeps paying dividends in a weird way.
Yeah.
And I think the key difference is that despite how messy Mickey and Paulie and Adrian and Rocky all are, because they're all complicated, messy people.
Yeah.
The love between Rocky and Adrian is pure love.
Yeah, authentic. Yes.
It's fairy tale. It is this person is right for this person. This person's right for that person. That is done deal. Laura and Frank, that's not true.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%.
You know,
yes.
And this is the actual ending of David Mamet's script.
Oh, wow.
That is the end of the movie. And Lumet was like, no, we haven't dealt with it. There's more emotional stuff we have to deal with. And so we cut to Laura's in bed. There's food on the bed next to her. She's drinking, which I think is really important. She's smoking, which I think is really important. Yeah. She grabs the phone and dials. And we cut to Frank, who's sitting, his feet on the desk, and he looks at the phone, and it rings, and you can see him think about answering it, and it rings, and she sits listening. I'm sure you've done this too, listening to the rings, wondering if they'll pick up, and the phone keeps ringing. Back to Frank.
Frank reaches for the phone and then stops himself. So, like I said, he is still somewhat willing to play with the fire, but does not pick up the phone. And that's the lesson that Frank has grown. As a human would. He's grown enough to still have the impulse, but not act on it, right? And I think that's important and essential. And then we fade to black. And by the way, I've been on both sides of this. the calling and the ignoring of the call, knowing what it means if I pick up the phone in a dating situation.
Yeah.
So there's power in that. But I think this is a way also, as you said, Steve, Mamet walked out. This is a way of maybe appeasing Mamet. We won't honor the fact that you don't want to have a verdict. But at the end, we'll still give you an ambiguous ending. Will he or won't he? Will they or won't they? So the audience can carry that with them out of the theater. And I think that's a great way to find a compromise with Mamet, who clearly wanted this to have an ambiguous ending.
What's amazing is I completely agree with you, is that the key to this is because he doesn't pick up, is that this could go on forever.
Yes.
And he could at some point in the future pick up the phone.
Yeah.
And he could and she could at some point in the future stop calling.
Right.
And so what happens is we have the movie remains open in our minds.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about it is obviously this is a story of Frank Galvin's journey, but Frank Galvin's journey has two distinct elements. One element is the case.
Yeah.
And the case is a triumph and he wins.
Yep.
And the other element is this relationship with Laura. And it is profound and moving, and it is definitely not a win.
No.
It stays in that ambiguous column.
Yeah.
One thing that I was wondering watching this moment is I wonder if David Fincher and Aaron Sorkin were thinking of this as they filmed the end of The Social Network.
Oh, yeah. The clicking on the friend request, right?
Yep.
Great point, Steve. I could absolutely see that because that's essentially the same version of a phone call nowadays with that friend request, because responding to that friend request is essentially picking up the phone. Great point.
The shoot was a 43-day shoot. Sidney Lumet finished the film 1 week early.
Wow.
Again, this is the guy for me. So the movie was nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor for James Mason. I can't believe that Charlotte Rampling was not nominated for Best Supporting Actress.
Right. Yeah,
nominated for Best Screenplay. Paul didn't want to go to the Oscars. This is his fifth nomination. He never won. And Zanuck and Brown were so sure he would get it, they convinced him to go. And of course, as we discussed a couple of years ago, this is the year of Gandhi.
Yeah.
So Ben Kingsley, and I can't argue Ben Kingsley's Oscar.
No.
But if Paul Newman had won, I wouldn't be able to argue that either.
Right. Because, I mean, Kingsley was a new young actor. So you would be going like, okay, there will be other opportunities.
Lou Gossett Jr. won for Officer and a Gentleman, and he's great in that.
Yeah.
And as we talked about, 1982 is a crazy year for movies. The other Best Picture nominations are E.T., Missing, and Tootsie. But then this is also the year of Blade Runner, King of Comedy, Sophie's Choice, Victor Victoria, Fritz Corraldo, Wrath of Khan, 48 Hours, Year of Living Dangerously. Also things like Conan, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, First Blood, Poltergeist, Garp. I mean, there's a lot of good movies that came out this year.
It's almost like a friend of the Cine-Files should do a documentary series on 1982. Oh, wait. Scott Mantz already did. Scott Mantz already did. So for those of you who missed out on Scott Mantz's documentary series, you should definitely watch his series on 1982, which him and a number of people were involved in, but a fantastic series highlighting how many incredible movies came out in 1982 and why it's such a seminal year for films.
And Paul did get that honorary Oscar, and then he actually won the Oscar for The Color of Money, which I like more than you do, but it's not we were in this vicinity. It's an entirely different time code from this film.
God. We have to do we do a live show on that one? I don't remember if we did a live.
We did a live show on Color of Money.
We did. All right.
So I will give my final thoughts first, because I feel like this is so much your movie. For me, this is why we do the Cine-Files. Frankly, this kind of film, because it's a kind of film that just keeps giving the more you dig into it. The more you look at it, the more there is to see. And I am sure that if we did this again, we would discover all sorts of new things. And it's because of just all of these consummate artists getting together to make this unbelievably human portrayal of complicated, gray, troubled, needy, hopeful people that are endlessly fascinating. And at the heart of all of this, despite all the great conversation of Sidney Lumet's incredible direction, an incredible cast, incredible score, incredible script from David Mamet, to me, this is all rests on the shoulders of Paul Newman. Like, it's Paul Newman's desire to go there. It's not that any of those people aren't brilliant people who did brilliant things. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying if Paul Newman didn't go there, like that moment in the rehearsal where he went, "Oh, I'm not up to this. I haven't gotten there yet. I have to keep digging deeper." That's that moment that he elevates from movie. He's always a great actor, but from movie star to one of the great performances of all time, as far as I'm concerned. And that's what's been so, the fact that we've done Butch and Sundance through The Sting to this, and you see what this guy is capable of. This is clearly one of the greatest movie stars and one of the greatest actors of all time. I will always say that Sidney Lumet is the kind of director I wanted to be, because he is kind to his actors, loves the creative process, loves the collaborative process, and pretty humble about how he does stuff. That's truly what I love. And you see the emergence clearly of David Mamet as an unbelievable writer. And in particular, it's the writing between the lines, the structure, the way he puts stuff together, and the way he activates things in his audience that really works. And man, this movie will haunt me, and I will watch it again. And maybe 10 years from now, John, you and I will have another conversation about it. That's how good I think this film is.
Yeah. There are films you see at certain times in your life, and they affect you because of how you're built as a person. And I do believe that some of us come out of the womb in a certain way. Like we come out with a proclivity to believe in certain things, to be creative, to not be creative, to lean in our own selfish impulses, to not lean into our selfish impulses, to be a people pleaser, to not be a people pleaser. I think all those things are born in us to a degree. So certain films latch onto you at certain ages because of how you're built. And this is a film that latched onto me through my mother at a young age that I've never been able to shake. And I've always loved because of the message of the movie, which is, as Steve said, no matter how cynical or bitter I can be sometimes, and those of you who follow me on social media know that I can go toe-to-toe or get into back and forths, but at the end of the day, I do believe in humanity. I do believe the part of my anger and my frustration is the fact that we aren't better. We don't do better. We can't be better, and we have to fight to be better. And there are people who are working for us not to be better, and we need to be better. And the film says that. And it's almost like Amadeus. It takes an imperfect protagonist like Frank, like so many of us are. And that's another thing that's great about the movie. It breaks all these conventions. It kind of has bones from the 1970s, an imperfect protagonist who is fighting a systemic, corrupt situation, not only to the church, but the legal profession through the judge. He is fighting the courts and the church at the same time. This idea, and Steve we've talked about this many times on this show, the idea of the little guy against the big guy. And I always love that. And ever since I was a kid, and I don't know if it's because I was born the son of immigrants here in this country, because we didn't have a lot of money. So I was born into not poverty, but certainly a low income, and having to deal with that and get ridiculed for that and endure all of that, but still believe in the principles of life, still believe in these things that you're supposed to do good, and that if you do good, good things will happen to you. People will change. People will be affected by it. And this film speaks to that. I think Steve did a really great job of laying out the technical reasons why the film works, along with the emotional reasons and the performance and creative reasons as well. But I can only speak from my point of view. And for me, it resonates on a deeply soulful level. And I think that's why I love this movie as deeply as I do. Yes, the acting is fantastic. Mamet's writing is incredible. Paul Newman delivers the performance of a lifetime. All the actors playing the other characters in the ensemble are really, really gifted and deliver phenomenal performances that make you ache and make you feel so many things as you're watching the movie. But at the end of the day, the film is a soulful commentary on humanity. And that's why it stays with me, and on the possibilities of humanity and what we can do if we do the right thing, and how we can overcome the biggest mountains if we work together to do the right thing. And if we focus on that, anything is possible. And that's what I love about this movie, and what it leaves you with me at least, every time I watch it. So I can't thank Steve enough for us finally tackling this movie and having me rewatch it so many more times to get back in touch with my appreciation and my love for this film. And I hope everyone who's been listening to us over these last 3 weeks, has enjoyed the film and enjoyed our discussions, because this has been one of those really special movies that we've tackled here on the Cine-Files.
So that is what we think about the verdict. We would love to hear your thoughts, what you felt going through this journey with us. You can visit us on our Facebook page. Just do a search for the Cine-Files. You can check us out on X at Cine_Files, the Cine-File podcast on Instagram. You can subscribe to the show at all the usual places, starting with Apple Podcasts or Spotify, also on YouTube. Comments are so much fun on YouTube and on Spotify. Reviews on Spotify and Apple Podcasts are extremely helpful. You can support the show, as we said many times, at patreon.com/the Cine-Files or at Apple Podcasts, where you can get our Cine-Files shorts as well as ad-free versions of the show. And of course, on Patreon, you can also join our Cine-Files advisory board, where we just had a fantastic long discussion about the entire career of Paul Newman. That was a lot of fun a couple of days ago. And if you want to reach me, you can do so at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. John, how about you?
You can always reach me at The Rocha Says on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, The Outlaw Nation on Twitch, and my YouTube channel, youtube.com/John Rocha Says, and my other podcasts, The Geek Buddies and The Hot Mic, that are out there for you all to enjoy, and the Outlaw Nation Podcast Network, which has all our shows on there except for The Geek Buddies and The Hot Mic.
And that's it for this week. We'll be back next week to wrap up this exploration of Paul Newman and Robert Redford, and also celebrate baseball in October with our new deep dive into The Natural.